Chapter 3460. Jiang Tianyi, Chao Qingyu, and the others could not even take care of themselves. Yun Yao could not protect herself. She had to rely on Ji Tianxing to protect her. She also knew that Ji Tianxing had no time to find the weakness of the divine array in order to protect her. If this continued, it would only drag on endlessly. This was very disadvantageous to them. Therefore, she took the initiative to suggest to Ji Tianxing, "Tianxing, don't worry about me. I will return to the divine pagoda to recuperate now. If you can't break the divine array, we will all be trapped here." Ji Tianxing and she had a telepathic connection. The two of them did not need to say much about the reasons and the stake. They both knew very well. Therefore, Ji Tianxing did not hesitate or dissuade her. He readily nodded and agreed. Swoosh! With a flash of divine light, Yun Yao entered the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda and returned to the distorted spacetime. She was out of danger. Ji Tianxing also heaved a sigh of relief. The pressure on him was greatly reduced. He continued to cast spells to block the divine array's attack. He also took the opportunity to use his God's Eye mystic technique to observe the fifth divine array. Although this divine array was operating at an extremely fast speed, Bai Feng was also constantly adjusting it and using all kinds of methods to cover up the divine array's weakness. However, Ji Tianxing's array formation skills and experience far exceeded Bai Feng's imagination. No matter how intricate and complicated the divine array was, it would become clear in his eyes. He quickly analyzed the veins and nodes of the divine formation by following the vines to get to the melon, extracting the silk from the cocoon. Then, he selected the weakest and most vulnerable points from the tens of millions of nodes of the array. This process sounded simple, but it actually required a lot of deduction and calculation. Only a monster like Ji Tianxing would be able to analyze the results in such a short period of time, and with such accuracy. Time passed quickly. Soon, 15 minutes passed. Finally, Ji Tianxing found a weak point in the 5-colored light screen that covered the sky and the sun. Found it. Everyone, attack with me. Ji Tianxing was energized and shouted in a sonorous voice. He held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and unleashed 100% of his power. He stabbed out a dazzling giant sword. Shwa! The gigantic sword broke through all the blade lights and sword shadows in the sky and crashed into the 5-colored light screen with a deafening boom. However, everyone was exhausted from resisting the divine formation's attacks. It was very difficult for them to attack together with him. Only Jiang Tianyi, who was relatively strong, was able to draw his bow and shoot 3 shooting star arrows at that weak spot. Unfortunately, his and Ji Tianxing's attacks were unable to break through the light curtain, leaving only a crack. Ji Tianxing was not discouraged. With a determined look on his face, he shouted, again, "Jiang Tianyi, let's attack at the same time." Jiang Tianyi naturally obeyed. When he slashed out with his full strength, he drew his bow and shot out 4 meteor arrows without any regard for his own safety. That giant sword shone with golden light and contained an extremely powerful and mysterious power. This was a completely new kind of power that Jiang Tianyi had never come into contact with before. He felt that it was extremely powerful and unfamiliar. This was because Ji Tianxing had used the power of the 5 elements to execute the world slash. Kaboom! Amidst a loud boom, the world slash and the meteor arrows hit the 5-colored light screen at the same time. The light screen, which was as thick as a wall, was instantly blasted a few 100 feet wide hole in it. Thousands of pieces flew everywhere. After the successful attack, Ji Tianxing and Jiang Tianyi hurriedly covered everyone, passing through the sky full of saber lights and sword shadows, rushing out of the gap. Shwa! In the blink of an eye, everyone had escaped from the 5th divine formation and arrived at the edge of the flowing river pass. There was only one light screen left in front of them. Jiang Tianyi was excited. He said happily, "There is only one divine formation left. Let's work together to break this divine formation. Then, we can surround Bai Feng and kill that old bastard. Chao Qingyu, Yank, and Lan Er were filled with relief and anticipation. They were clearly much more relaxed. However, Ji Tianxing was still expressionless. He frowned and observed the divine formation's light screen. His eyes were focused and cautious. At the same time, Bai Feng gave up on the fifth divine formation and controlled the sixth divine formation to attack again. The divine formation's light screen, which was thousands of miles wide, released all kinds of divine abilities and killer moves toward Ji Tianxing and the others. As he controlled the divine formation to attack, he thought to himself, that method just now worked. His speed of breaking the divine formation slowed down significantly. It even took him close to 15 minutes. However, if this continues, even if I still have 6 divine formations as my trump card, I can only delay them for 2 hours. The power of one divine formation is not enough. I have to activate the other divine formations in advance. After making up his mind, Bai Feng used one hand to control the sixth divine formation. His other hand used a divine ability to activate the 3 hidden divine formations. Shua, shua. A moment later, 3 more light screens lit up in the night sky outside the flowing river pass. One light screen was formed by divine lightning. It flashed with billions of lightning arcs and looked very violent. The other screen of light was condensed from blood flames, and the annihilation divine flames that could incinerate the heavens and obliterate the earth rose with terrifying might. The third light screen was rainbow-colored. It was formed by more than 120 types of laws and divine powers. It was unpredictable. Under Bai Feng's control, the 3 divine formations sped up and released all kinds of divine abilities and killer moves toward Ji Tianxing and the others. Boom! Bam! 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 Swish! 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 Damn it! He still has a trump card. He set up more than 6 divine formations in the flowing river pass. Ji Tianxing and Jiang Tianyi felt the pressure increase. They could only defend with all their might to ensure their safety. Chao Qingyu, Yank, and Lan Er were in a precarious situation. They could lose their lives at any time. Especially Lan Er. She was quickly hit by the sword and saber lights. Dozens of wounds were left on her body. Seeing this, Chao Qingyu's heart ached. He was so angry that his eyes almost popped out. He did not care about his own safety and tried his best to save Lan. In the end, he was also attacked by the endless lightning and divine light. Soon, he was covered in blood and wounds. Both husband and wife were seriously injured. Their combat strength decreased sharply. If they still couldn't escape from Flowing River Pass, both of them would be smashed into pieces and die in the divine formation. Seeing this, Yank also looked angry. He raised his head and cursed Bai Feng. His defense was very strong and he could still hold on for the time being. However, it was impossible for him to save Chao Qingyu and his wife. It was already very impressive that he could protect himself. Helpless, Ji Tianxing could only let Chao Qingyu and his wife return to the Green Jade Divine Warship to recuperate. The Green Jade Divine Warship shrunk to the size of a sesame seed and was stored in his body. Thus, only Ji Tianxing, Jiang Tianyi, and Yank were left in the divine formation. As the number of people decreased, their situation became more and more dangerous. Jiang Tianyi and Yank were anxious. They looked at Ji Tianxing and placed their hopes on him. Young Master Tianxing, we can't go on like this. We can only hold on for a few more days. Our divine power will weaken. My lord, please think of something. Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a moment. Then, he said in a low voice, hold on a little longer. I have an idea. Chapter 3461. Upon hearing Ji Tianxing's words, Jiang Tianyi and Yank's eyes lit up with hope. Master, have you thought of a way? Yanku was filled with anticipation as he asked subconsciously. But Ji Tianxing didn't answer. In a flash of white light, he disappeared. He was nowhere to be found in the entire Flowing River Pass. Only his divine soul was present. Jiang Tianyi and Yank both realized that Ji Tianxing hadn't turned invisible. He had truly disappeared. But even though he had disappeared from the divine array, his aura remained in the divine array. Jiang Tianyi and Yank were both surprised and incredulous by this bizarre occurrence. In fact, Ji Tianxing had used the ultimate skill of the infinite sky of chaos. He had become one with the heavens and earth. He didn't exist, but he was everywhere. In this way, the hundreds of thousands of abhijnas released by the 4 abhijnas and the billions of saber lights and sword shadows couldn't do anything to him. Not only had he disappeared, but he was also invincible. Unless Bai Feng destroyed the entire flowing river pass in one move and reduced everything within 10,000 miles to nothingness. Otherwise, Ji Tianxing's life wouldn't be in danger. At this moment, Bai Feng was still in shock. He could sense Ji Tianxing's aura, but he couldn't find any trace of Ji Tianxing. That despicable little bastard. He actually disappeared? What kind of trick is this? Where did he hide? Bai Feng controlled the divine array to attack Jiang Tianyi and Yank while searching for Ji Tianxing. Unfortunately, 15 minutes had passed, but he still couldn't find Ji Tianxing. During this time, Ji Tianxing focused on observing the divine array and wasn't disturbed. He finally found the 6th divine array's weak point. Then, he reappeared in the divine array, next to Jiang Tianyi. Jiang Tianyi, attack with me! Ji Tianxing shouted solemnly. He waved the sword of burial of heaven and used his ultimate sword Dao skill, slashing out a 30,000-foot-long divine sword. Heaven-splitting sword. Jiang Tianyi also went all out, shooting 6 starlight arrows. Whoosh! Swish! The sky-splitting sword and the 6 shooting stars streaked across the night sky in an extremely dazzling manner. They passed through the countless saber lights and sword shadows and struck the weak point of the divine formation. Boom! There was no doubt about the result. A huge hole was blasted in the 5-colored light screen, and dense cracks extended from it. Taking advantage of the shaking of the divine formation, Ji Tianxing took Jiang Tianyi and Yank through the gap and escaped from Flowing River Pass. The 3 of them had left the ruined Flowing Chuan Pass. However, there were still 3 layers of divine array light screens in front of them. Looking at the 3 light screens, Yank gnashed his teeth and cursed, "White Phoenix, you old dog, you're really despicable and shameless. How many more divine formations have you set up? Take them all out." Jiang Tianyi maintained his calm and said in a low voice, "Even if Bai Feng is a high-level god king, it would be very difficult for her to set up more than a dozen medium-grade king-grade divine formations in just a few days. Therefore, she should only be left with these 3 divine formations." Ji Tianxing frowned and shook his head. Logically speaking, Bai Feng would need 2 to 3 months to set up 9 medium-grade king-grade divine formations. However, he has the help of a few hundred god monarchs and 200,000 soldiers. He doesn't lack the divine stones and materials needed to set up the formations. Within half a month, he would probably be able to set up more than a dozen divine formations. Ah! Yank was stunned and a little dumbfounded. Jiang Tianyi frowned and asked with an ugly expression, "You mean that Bai Feng has other trump cards besides these 3 divine formations? What should we do? These divine formations are endless. When can we escape?" Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "It's fine. I'll break through as many divine formations as he sets up. After all, the speed at which he sets up the formations is nothing compared to the speed at which I break them. Within a few hours, we'll definitely be able to escape the seal." With his words, Jiang Tianyi and Yank felt as though they had eaten pills of reassurance. They also felt more confident. After that, the 2 of them continued to defend against the 3 divine formations with all their might. Ji Tianxing used the same trick again, and used the limitless sky of turbidity to disappear into the divine formations and focus on observing the divine formations. Bai Feng was as helpless as ever. He couldn't stop Ji Tianxing from disappearing, nor could he find out where Ji Tianxing's real body was. After all, this was the second time Ji Tianxing had used the limitless sky of turbidity in front of him. He wasn't a monstrous genius like Ji Tianxing. How could he see through it so quickly? With nowhere to vent his anger, Bai Feng became even more aggressive and attacked Jiang Tianyi and Yank even more ferociously. Jiang Tianyi was fine. He was quite strong and had a medium-grade king-grade divine artifact protecting him. He was temporarily safe. Yank, on the other hand, was in big trouble. The super-strong defense of the rock tribe was no longer of any use. Soon, he was covered in wounds and bloodstains from the attacks of the 3 divine arrays. However, he was stubborn. He gritted his teeth and persevered. He didn't even cry out in pain because he was afraid that Ji Tianxing would be distracted. Moreover, he didn't enter the divine tower to heal. Jiang Tianyi tried to persuade him, but he shook his head and refused. He explained, "These superficial wounds are nothing to the rock race. Everyone has retreated to heal. There are only the 3 of us left. I can't back down and let you and the Lord fight alone." Jiang Tianyi looked at him in surprise and gave him a thumbs up when he heard his deep but determined voice. Soon, half an hour passed. Ji Tianxing was quite injured and had used up a lot of his divine power. His observation of the divine formations had slowed down. In addition, this lightning divine formation was obviously more complicated than the previous 6 divine formations. Therefore, Ji Tianxing spent twice as much time to find the weak point of the divine formation. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. He joined forces with Jiang Tianyi to attack the weak point of the divine formation. If they couldn't break it the first time, they attacked a second time, a third time, a fourth time. Finally, after 7 consecutive attacks, the 2 of them broke the 7th divine formation. The 3 of them passed through the 100-foot wide gap and escaped the seal of the divine formation. They continued to attack the 8th divine formation. Compared to the previous divine formation, this one was more complicated and more complete. Ji Tianxing used the same trick again and had to spend more time to find the weak point of this divine formation. Just like that, time continued to pass. Another hour later, the 3 of them broke through the 8th divine formation and continued to face the 9th divine formation. Ji Tianxing's speed of breaking the divine formation was getting slower and slower. However, compared to all the God Kings, this was still a heaven-defying speed. Bai Feng's expression darkened. His heart clenched and he was extremely anxious. In order to slow down Ji Tianxing's speed, he had to activate the last 3 divine formations in advance. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Another 3 screens of light lit up, covering a radius of more than 10,000 miles. As Bai Feng controlled the divine array to unleash devastating attacks, she thought to herself, "It's no wonder that celestial aspect emissary was defeated by him. This brat is truly a monstrous genius. This king is really unlucky. Why did I meet such a perverted guy? I've used up all my trump cards. In 4 hours at most, this king will have to run for his life." Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 3462. However, Bai Feng had already predicted the outcome. No one in the entire Fire Mulberry region could help him. Only Stellar Aspect Ambassador and the other region lords were qualified to help and save him. But those Divine King powerhouses needed around 8 days at the fastest before they could reach the Flowing Creek Pass. No matter what, Bai Feng would not be able to hold on until then. Stellar Aspect Ambassador, I have already tried my best. Bai Feng looked up at the night sky in the north and sighed silently in his heart. Soon another 2 hours passed. Ji Tianxing had also broken through the 9th divine array, creating a 1,000-foot wide gap. Ji Tianxing led Jiang Tianyi and Yank through the gap and continued to attack the 10th divine array. The last 3 divine arrays were each more complicated than the last, and their defensive power was also stronger. Ji Tianxing and the other two's power continued to weaken, causing the time needed to break through the divine arrays to become longer and longer. In the process of breaking through the divine arrays, Ji Tianxing had considered using the spatial transference divine ability to teleport thousands of miles away. That way, he would not need to break through the divine arrays to escape the seals of the dozen or so divine arrays. However, this idea was not realistic. The 12 king-grade divine arrays that Bai Feng had set up all had the ability to seal space. Therefore, Ji Tianxing could only proceed step by step and break the divine formations one by one. Time passed very slowly. To Bai Feng, every minute and every second was especially torturous. 3 hours later, the 10th divine array was broken through, and the pressure on Ji Tianxing and the other two was greatly reduced. 6 hours later, the 11th divine array was broken through as well. There was only one divine array left in front of Ji Tianxing and the other two. The pressure on them decreased once again, and their expressions were clearly much more relaxed. However, Bai Feng's expression was as cold as ice, and his eyes were filled with disappointment and unwillingness. In the end, we have failed miserably and are powerless to reverse the situation. He sighed in his heart as he tried his best to control the divine array to kill Ji Tianxing and the other two. However, defeat was inevitable. No matter how hard he tried, he could not change the outcome. 2 hours later, this divine array was also cracked by Ji Tianxing and Jiang Tianyi. Even though both of them were panting from exhaustion, their divine powers were weak, and their auras were unstable and chaotic. However, if they attacked 100 more times, they would be able to break through the 5-colored light screen and rush out of this divine formation. At this moment, Bai Feng had completely given up all hope. He stopped controlling the divine formation and gave up on struggling. He said to Ji Tianxing, "Tianxing, I have to admit that I have underestimated you. With your talent, strength, and methods, you'll definitely be unrivaled in the world in the future and become a well-known figure among divine kings. But in the end, you are only a god king. You will never be able to escape the rule of His Majesty, the God Emperor." As early as 1,000 years ago, the world had already changed. In the present boundless heaven continent, the God Emperor reigned supreme. No one could go against his will. The power of the God Emperor realm is not something you can imagine. Even if you can kill this king, Oracle Xingxiang, and even more domain lords and divine envoys. But so what? In the end, you will die under the siege of so many god kings. In fact, His Majesty the God Emperor only needs one palm to easily crush all of you. At this moment, Bai Feng's anger had already subsided. His emotions were calm and steady. The words he said were also sincere and came from the bottom of his heart. Among them, there was a faint trace of helplessness. After pausing for a moment, he continued, 1,000 years ago, it was indeed the various great paradises that controlled the continent and looked down on the common people. But that is already history. Whether it is you or me, we can no longer immerse ourselves in the glory of the past. The world has already changed. If you want to live on peacefully, you can only give up on unrealistic delusions. This king has said all that I have to say. Take care of yourselves. With that, Divine King Bai Feng sighed and turned to fly away. Swoosh! He transformed into a scarlet flame and rapidly disappeared into the horizon, escaping without a trace. Inside the divine formation, Ji Tianxing and Jiang Tianyi were still attacking the divine formation together. Yank ignored his miserable injuries and pointed in the direction that Bai Feng escaped. He cursed angrily. That old bastard, how could he be so cowardly? When he saw that we were about to break through the last formation, he knew that his life was in danger and actually fled in advance. Jiang Tianyi said in a neutral tone, "Actually, we are all heavily injured and weak. If Bai Feng fought a bloody battle with us, he might not lose. But he was too cautious and would rather give up a little hope than take the risk." Ji Tianxing recalled Bai Feng's words and revealed a thoughtful expression. He said, An old and cunning fellow like him naturally has his own way of survival. Being greedy and advancing rashly is not a good thing. Only by being cautious can one live long. Moreover, Bai Feng has no enmity with us. He was just following orders. He has already sacrificed 3 god kings, hundreds of elites, and an army of 200,000. There is no need for him to throw himself in as well. Jiang Tianyi and Yank nodded in agreement. After a moment of silence, Yank asked, "Master, what did he mean by those words he said before he fled?" Ji Tianxing frowned. "He probably misunderstood our intentions and felt the same way. That's why he said those words. Speaking of which, this person is actually not annoying. In fact, there is a possibility that we will cross paths again." Cross paths again? Yank revealed a confused expression. He asked in confusion, "Master, could it be that you want to chase him to his nest and kill him?" Before Ji Tianxing could reply, Jiang Tianyi smiled gently and said, "It's not what you think. Young Master Tianxing's words of crossing paths might be friendly." Yank still did not understand. He simply scratched his head and did not say anything else. Jiang Tianyi continued, "Actually, I am the same as Bai Feng. We are both disciples of the ancient clans. I can empathize with what he said. 1,000 years ago, the ancient clans were the true rulers of the continent and enjoyed unparalleled glory and resources. However, the Shura god emperor appeared and swept through the various paradises, unifying the 100 territories. The glorious era that belonged to the ancient clans has passed. We should not be immersed in our memories. We must adjust and adapt to the new situation. Only then can we continue to reproduce and survive." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, "Perhaps Bai Feng thought that the Jiang clan and I are working together to fight against the Shura god emperor. That's why he warned us." Jiang Tianyi was stunned. He said with an awkward expression, "That should be the case." After a pause, he asked worriedly, "Young Master Tianxing, will Bai Feng report this to the god emissaries and the Shura god emperor? If the Shura god emperor thinks that the Jiang clan has thoughts of betrayal, won't the Jiang clan be in danger?" Ji Tianxing waved his hand and comforted him. "Bai Feng probably won't do that. Didn't the various ancient clans secretly form an alliance? If the Shura god emperor finds a reason to attack the divine attraction grotto heaven, the other paradises will also be in danger. Everyone should understand the principle of being intimately connected." Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3463. Originally, Jiang Tianyi was filled with worry. But after listening to Ji Tianxing's advice, he felt much more at ease. The two continued to attack. After more than 20 attacks, they finally broke through the divine array's light barrier. Boom! Crack! There was a loud explosion as a 1,000-foot-wide gap appeared. Outside the gap was the cold night sky where the mountain wind whistled. There were no more obstacles. Ji Tianxing and Jiang Tianyi revealed gratified expressions. Yank was even more excited and couldn't help but cheer. "Great! We finally broke through the 12 divine arrays and are about to leave this damned place." The three quickly passed through the gap and left Flowing River Pass. Being in the night sky, the three felt much more relaxed and unrestrained. Jiang Tianyi took out his palace and cast a spell to turn it into a divine ship. The three entered the palace. Jiang Tianyi steered the palace south while recuperating from his injuries. Ji Tianxing and Yank both entered a secret room to recuperate. Yank's injuries were the most severe. Even with the help of divine pills and miraculous medicines, he still needed more than a decade to recover. Thus, Ji Tianxing let him enter the distorted spacetime to recuperate under the blood flame sacred tree. Ji Tianxing also entered the distorted spacetime to recuperate before cultivating. After all, he had gained a lot from this battle at Flowing River Pass. Qin Yi Wu Shui and the sky-smelting divine craftsman had all fallen. Their interspatial rings and divine spark fragments had all fallen into his hands. After recuperating from his injuries, He would count the spoils of war and refine the divine spark fragments of the 3 divine kings. In the next 2 days, the divine ship formed by the palace passed through the Fire Mulberry Empire without any obstructions. At the same time, slanting Phoenix Mountain in the center of the Fire Mulberry domain, amidst the white sea of clouds, inside a dazzling palace, Bai Feng sat alone in her study, looking out the window at the setting sun. Her expression was somewhat lonely and weathered. Her 2 deputies were dead, and the sky-smelting divine craftsman was also killed. She was the only divine king left in the entire Fire Mulberry domain, and a large number of elite experts had died. The Fire Mulberry domain could be considered to have declined. It would be difficult for it to recover to its peak without a few hundred or 1,000 years. Bai Feng sighed and took out a communication jade slip to contact Celestial Aspect Divine Envoy. Stellar Aspect God Emissary, this king has gathered the elite forces of Fire Mulberry region and set up an ambush at Flowing River Pass. We have fought fiercely with those foreign race god kings for an entire night. Unfortunately, we failed. I was unable to capture them and only managed to delay them for 1 night. I am deeply sorry, but I have tried my best. I hope you can understand. Bai Feng briefly reported the results of the battle, then waved her hand and sent out a communication jade slip. Swish. After the jade slip flew away, he sat in the study and waited silently. About a quarter of an hour later, a beam of spiritual light flew down from the sky and landed in front of Bai Feng. This was Celestial Aspect's reply. Bai Feng picked up the communication jade slip and read the message inside with her divine sense. The dignified voice of the Stellar Aspect God Messenger sounded in his mind. Brother Bai, please restrain your grief. In this battle of Flowing Rivers Pass, Brother Bai's loyalty to His Highness the God Emperor can be witnessed by the sun and the moon. In the future, this envoy will definitely personally report to the God Emperor. In addition, the strength of those foreign race god kings cannot be underestimated. It is already commendable that Brother Bai was able to delay them for 1 night. Thank you for your help, Brother Bai. This envoy will remember this favor. Of course, Brother Bai, please be patient. Those foreign race god kings will not be able to jump around for long. This envoy will definitely exterminate them. In this envoy's hunting plan, this is only the beginning. They should be heading south, passing through the Fire Mulberry domain and entering the Red Dragon domain. This envoy and 2 other divine envoys, as well as 17 domain lords, are rushing over at full speed and gathering from all directions. We will meet in the south of the Red Dragon domain and should be able to complete the encirclement there. At that time, no matter how capable those foreign race god kings are, they will not be able to escape from the palms of this envoy. After reading the message in the jade slip, Bai Feng silently put down the communication jade slip and fell into a state of hesitation. From the tone of the Stellar Aspect God Messenger, this matter should not have been reported to the God Emperor. After all, several domain lords and god kings were killed consecutively. This only proves that he is not capable enough. He must want to ask the other 2 divine envoys for help to kill Tianqing and the others as soon as possible. This is the only way to atone for his crimes. Their encirclement will converge in the Red Dragon domain. Although the Stellar Aspect God Messenger did not ask me to help, he did not ask me to rest and recuperate. Should I go or not? Bai Feng frowned, silently weighing the pros and cons. In order to kill Tianqing and the others, the Stellar Aspect God Messenger is making such a big fuss. More than 20 domain lords are rushing over to help. I am so close to the Red Dragon domain. If I don't go, I will be criticized. Forget it, I will go to the Red Dragon domain to join in the fun. Bai Feng made up his mind regarding this matter. However, there was still one thing that he was hesitating about. Tianqing and the others met Jiang Tianyi of the Jiang clan at the Fire Dragon Mountain and traveled together. I don't know what their relationship is and what the Jiang clan is trying to do. Should I tell the Stellar Aspect God Messenger about this news? Bai Feng's fingers tapped on the table. After pondering for a long time, he still could not make up his mind. 20 days passed in the blink of an eye. Tianyi Palace passed through the Fire Mulberry Domain and entered the Red Dragon Domain. Before entering the Red Dragon Domain, Jiang Tianyi was especially cautious when crossing the border. They had been ambushed at the Flowing Chuan Pass at the border of the Fire Mulberry Domain. He was too embarrassed to make the same mistake again. However, it was strange this time. The border of the Red Dragon Domain was calm and everything was as usual. Not only were there no traps or ambushes, but there was also nothing out of the ordinary. It was as if the Red Dragon Domain Lord did not know they were coming. This abnormality made Jiang Tianyi more vigilant. He muttered to himself, "Sir Tianxing offended the stellar aspect God messenger. That guy mobilized many domain lords and divine kings to kill us with great fanfare. The Red Dragon Domain Lord did not set up an ambush at the border. Does he want us to lower our guard? Then, he will set up an ambush somewhere in the Red Dragon Domain. He wants to catch us off guard and catch us off guard?" Jiang Tianyi silently guessed and moved even more cautiously. At this moment, in the distorted space-time of the Jiutian Tenju Pagoda, Ji Tianxing and Yank had been in seclusion for nearly 3 years. Yank's injuries had mostly healed and were close to recovery. Ji Tianxing's injuries had long since healed. He had also counted the spoils of war and was refining the godhead fragments of the 3 divine kings. The space rings of the 3 divine kings had stored a huge amount of cultivation resources. Roughly estimating the value of those cultivation resources was close to 300 billion god stones. Logically speaking, this was a huge fortune. Unfortunately, most of the cultivation resources were of a lower grade. 90% of them were Monarch high-grade and Supreme-grade items. There were less Monarch low-grade divine weapons, divine abilities, cultivation methods, elixirs, talismans, and materials. Ji Tianxing picked out all the Monarch-level divine pills, divine abilities, cultivation methods, equipment, and materials. He kept a few divine pills and materials for his own use. The rest were given to Ji Ku, White Dragon, and Wu Shuang. He stuffed all the remaining cultivation resources, including all the god stones, into the heaven-mending orb for the 5 elements world to absorb. 200 billion god stones worth of cultivation resources was not too shocking to him. However, to the 5 elements world, it was a terrifying force that could stimulate the growth of the entire world. Chapter 3464. 200 billion god stones could expand the 5 elements world by at least 10%. With the expansion of the 5 elements world, Ji Tianxing's power would increase as well. Moreover, Ji Tianxing had refined the 3 Supreme Beings' Godhead fragments and his power would increase tremendously. Even the Blood Flame Sacred Tree, which had absorbed 200,000 soldiers, many Sir Gods and 3 Supreme Beings during the Battle of Flowing River Pass, had increased tremendously. Now, it had grown another 1,000 feet and its leaves were luxuriant. The divine power aura and crimson flame that it released were also stronger. Judging by the grade of king-level divine weapons, it was now at the peak of lower king level. Perhaps in the near future, it would devour more experts' blood souls and it might evolve into middle king level. When Ji Tianxing was refining the godhead fragments, a thought flashed across his mind. He remembered that Lin Shui had mentioned something to him previously. She had asked if there was any chance for Shui Huan's power to increase again. Sir God Shui Huan was severely injured back then and lost his divine body. Ji Tianxing had used the branch of the Blood Flame Sacred Tree to refine Shui Huan's body, allowing Shui Huan to become a high-level Sir God. Now, the Blood Flame Sacred Tree had evolved to king level. Ji Tianxing couldn't help but wonder if he would succeed if he took another branch of the Blood Flame Sacred Tree to replace Sir God Shui Huan's divine body. If he succeeded, wouldn't Sir God Shui Huan possess a king-level divine body? As long as he worked hard, he would be able to break through and become a real supreme being one day? However, if he didn't succeed, not only would Shui Huan lose his divine body, he might even lose his life. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing decided to reconsider. 1.5 years passed very quickly. The three Supreme Beings' Godhead fragments were refined by Ji Tianxing. His power had reached the peak of Second Heaven God King, and he was only one step away from Third Heaven God King. At the same time, he refined another 20 types of God Dao laws to increase his power. Now, he had mastered 420 types of laws. In terms of the number of laws, he had more than 10 types than Bai Feng, who was in 7th Heaven God King realm. If Bai Feng knew this secret, her eyeballs would probably fall to the ground. What the hell? Divine King Tianxing, who was able to fight him to a draw, was only in the second layer of the Divine King realm? The number of divine Dao laws grasped was actually even more than his? After finishing his cultivation, Ji Tianxing got up and stretched. He circled around the blood-flame sacred tree to check on everyone's condition. Yun Yao's injuries had already recovered, and she was cultivating in seclusion. The great battle at Flowing River Pass previously enriched her actual combat experience and also let her see the disparity between herself and Divine King powerhouses. She worked even harder in her cultivation and improved her strength bit by bit. Unfortunately, after careful observation, Ji Tianxing discovered that she basically showed no signs of breaking through to the Divine King realm. It seemed like he could only place his hopes on the 7th Divine Pearl. On the other hand, Ji Ku's situation was a little out of Ji Tianxing's expectations. The time she broke through to the 9th level Divine Lord realm was a little later than Yun Yao. However, she had already reached peak Divine Lord realm and was beginning to break through to the Divine King realm. Although it was difficult to break through to the Divine King realm, it was like crossing a natural chasm. But she had already started to try, and she summarized her experience from her failures, continuously strengthening her foundation. Ji Tianxing could tell that her foundation was already very robust, and she had very high hopes of breaking through to the Divine King realm. At most 1 to 200 years, at least 3 to 5 years, she should be able to succeed. Apart from that, White Dragon, Ji Wushuang, Zhen Hong, Black Dragon, and Xian Yu were all high-rank Divine Lord. Everyone was cultivating bitterly with all their might, looking like they would not give up until they broke through to the Divine King realm. But Ji Tianxing was clear in his heart that not all hard work could be exchanged for rewards. Not everyone would definitely break through to the Divine King realm if they followed him. Some results were actually predestined long ago. Of course, if a massive fortuitous opportunity appeared, perhaps the outcome would change. Ji Tianxing circled around the sacred tree and prepared to leave the distorted spacetime to check on Jiang Tianyi's situation. But right at this time, the burial of heaven's voice sounded out in his mind. I have 2 pieces of good news, do you want to hear it? Ever since the burial of heaven became a mid-rank king-grade divine artifact, it had not spoken again. This was the first time it had taken the initiative to contact Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing was stunned and hurriedly asked, "What good news? Old Ancestor 3 Absolutes has become a god." The burial of heaven's tone was calm and emotionless. Ji Tianxing frowned and was a little dazed. Old Ancestor 3 Absolutes? Which Old Ancestor 3 Absolutes? The burial of heaven was probably a little speechless. After a moment of silence, it explained, "It's the old man you subdued in the profound sky continent. Later, you refined him into an ancient tree, and he has been in the sword world ever since." So it's him. Ji Tianxing was enlightened and recalled. He chuckled and said, "It's been too long, I've forgotten about him." The burial of heaven continued to explain, "All these years, it has been rooted in the sword world, desperately absorbing heaven and earth spirit chi and resources, steadily increasing its strength. Originally, it was limited by the body of an ancient tree and could not become a god. But not long ago, I recovered to mid-rank king grade, and the sword world also expanded 100 times. The world changed greatly, divine power was abundant, and resources increased dramatically. Old Ancestor 3 Absolutes was the first to break through the shackles and become a true god. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said with a chuckle, "Interesting. This old man is tenacious. Even after becoming an ancient tree, he refused to give up hope of becoming a god. Now that he has become a true god, he can break free from the shackles and take human form again, moving freely." He thought for a moment and said, "How about this? Throw Old Ancestor 3 Absolutes into the Five Elements world and let him protect my father and guide his cultivation." The Burial of Heaven said calmly, "He is indeed a suitable candidate. The Five Elements world has transformed and its shackles have been released. Billions of living beings have the hope of becoming a god. Your father's aptitude is not too high, and he is still in the tribulation realm. With the protection and guidance of Old Ancestor 3 Absolutes, he will definitely be able to safely pass the 9 tribulations and become a martial saint." Ji Tianxing said with a smile, "I have refined the Five Elements world and placed it in the heaven-mending pearl. Even if those living beings become gods, they will not be able to ascend to the god realm." The Burial of Heaven agreed. "This is also the reason why Old Ancestor 3 Absolutes is so anxious. That is why I am informing you. Of course, the Five Elements world is not weaker than the god realm, so there is no need to ascend." Ji Tianxing stopped discussing this matter and asked, "What is the second good news?" The Burial of Heaven said calmly, "The Gold Mountain King has also become a god." The Gold Mountain King? Ji Tianxing was startled. With his previous experience, he thought for a moment and guessed the answer. "The leader of the Earth Spirit clan in the Sword World, right?" "Yes." The Burial of Heaven replied and added, "The Earth Spirit clan has already multiplied to 100,000 people, and there is no lack of martial gods and martial saints among them." Ji Tianxing was quite surprised and found it hard to believe. "Those dwarves are quite fertile, huh? I haven't paid attention to them for many years, and they have actually grown to this extent? It seems that the Earth Spirit clan is worth nurturing, and they will be useful in the future." "Understood." The Burial of Heaven replied and fell into a long silence, no longer speaking. Chapter 3465. Even though Ji Tianxing was already a divine king, he would only look forward and set his sights on the higher realms of the divine path and formulate a long-term plan for revenge. He would not linger on the past, nor would he waste time in reminiscing. Wuhan had not been found, and the 5 god emperors were still high above, ruling the divine realm. His blood feud had not been avenged, and the world was not at peace. But he also knew that after reaching the divine king realm, the progress of one's strength would definitely slow down. Ordinary divine king experts might only be able to break through one realm after several thousand or 10,000 years. Even a monstrous genius like him would have to spend dozens to hundreds of years before he could gradually increase his cultivation base. During this process, he would pay attention to the Five Elements world and the Sword world. When the time was right, he would secretly help and nurture the living beings of these two worlds. To him, the living beings of the Five Elements world and the Sword world were the foundation of his people, the foundation of his future forces. It might be difficult for them to achieve anything in the next 1,000 years. But thousands of years, 10,000 years later? Perhaps by then, the Earth Spirit clan of the Five Elements world and the Sword world would have a large number of divine lords and a small number of divine kings. That would be his people and forces. Creak, creak, creak. The stone door of the secret room opened. Ji Tianxing walked out of the secret room and came to the main hall of Tianyi Palace. Jiang Tianyi was sitting cross-legged in the main hall, silently healing himself while driving the palace south. He had to drive the palace and could not heal himself in seclusion. In this state of healing, his injuries recovered very slowly, and he had only recovered 70%. But he loved cleanliness, and his tattered white crane cloak had long been replaced with a new one, and his messy white hair was neatly combed. "Tianyi, where are we now?" Ji Tianxing walked in front of him and asked. Jiang Tianyi opened his eyes and greeted him, replying, "Young Master Tianxing, we just entered the Red Dragon domain not long ago." Ji Tianxing nodded and asked, "When crossing the border between the two domains, did you encounter any ambushes?" Jiang Tianyi shook his head and said with a serious expression, "Ever since the battle at Flowing River Pass, we have not encountered any ambushes. The Red Dragon domain has not reacted at all. But the more it is like this, the more I feel strange and uneasy." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and analyzed. Ever since the Azura God Emperor unified the entire boundless heaven continent, it has been peaceful for 1,000 years. Those divine envoys and domain lords were all arrogant. Now that something like this had happened, they would definitely not let the matter rest, nor would they try to keep the peace. Especially Stellar Aspect Emissary, he will definitely gather many domain lords and deity kings to kill me. It was just that the news of the defeat at Flowing River Pass had just spread out. They definitely had to act cautiously. In fact, they might even reformulate their plans and not be in a hurry to act. But the next time they make a move, it will definitely be a thunderous strike. That makes sense. Jiang Tianyi nodded in agreement and said in a low voice, 10 days ago, I sent a message to the Divine Attraction Paradise and asked the Jiang clan's spies to help me gather information. At the same time, I also sent a message to a friend in Shemi Paradise, asking her to help me investigate the situation in the surrounding regions. I reckon it won't be long before they get back to me." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "Shemi Paradise is best at gathering information and has eyes and ears all over the world. But the people of Shemi Paradise don't care about family and only care about money and benefit. You actually have friends?" Jiang Tianyi was stunned for a moment. For some reason, his face turned red and his gaze was a little evasive. Looking at his posture, Ji Tianxing vaguely understood something. Jiang Tianyi was a little embarrassed and hurriedly changed the topic, asking, "Young Master Tianxing, may I ask, how did you become enemies with Stellar Aspect Emissary?" Ji Tianxing replied casually, "At the beginning, I only became enemies with 2 domain lords. Those 2 domain lords suffered losses and went to Stellar Aspect Emissary for support. In the end, I killed one of the 2 domain lords and the other went missing. Stellar Aspect Emissary was also heavily injured by me. From then on, Stellar Aspect Emissary gathered many deity kings and domain lords to besiege me." "I see." Jiang Tianyi nodded and said with some indignation, "Those divine emissaries are very arrogant and domineering. They consider themselves the guards of the God Emperor and don't put anyone in their eyes. In the past, there were a few divine emissaries who went to Divine Attraction Paradise and all of them were very arrogant and arrogant. Anyone who offended them would be charged with the crime of disobeying the God Emperor and rebelling against the God Emperor. But in reality, many divine emissaries are even inferior to those domain lords. In the eyes of us ancient clan disciples, those divine emissaries are the lackeys of the God Emperor, and the most arrogant and despicable ones." Seeing Jiang Tianyi's reaction, Ji Tianxing couldn't help but ask, "You must know that I killed a domain lord and offended a divine emissary. Aren't you worried?" "Worried about what?" Jiang Tianyi asked subconsciously. Ji Tianxing said, "About getting into trouble." "Tch." Jiang Tianyi didn't think much of it and said with a smile, "What's there to be afraid of? You only killed a few domain lords and offended a divine emissary, not the Azura God Emperor. Our Divine Attraction Paradise has been passed down for tens of thousands of years. Why would we be afraid of a mere divine emissary?" The two chatted for a while and Ji Tianxing told him to treat his injuries well. Jiang Tianyi said that he was fine and that his injuries had mostly healed. At this time, a stream of light suddenly flew down from the sky and landed in front of Jiang Tianyi. Jiang Tianyi's face lit up with joy and he reached out to pick up the communication jade slip, saying, They must have found out, as he spoke. He used his divine sense to read the information in the jade slip. However, after reading the information in the jade slip, his expression became a little strange. Ji Tianxing asked, "What's wrong? What happened?" Jiang Tianyi explained, "It wasn't them who replied. It was ninth brother who asked me for help. 2 years ago, the clan sent me and 3 other brothers to the secular world to gain experience and recruit refining geniuses for the clan to replenish new blood. Ninth brother Jiang Tianxing is my half-brother from a different mother. We lived close to each other while the other 2 brothers went far away. One was in the south, and the other was in the east." Jiang Tianxing stayed in the Hengshan region for half a year and spent a lot of effort to find 2 refining geniuses. He wanted to recruit them back to the Jiang clan. He didn't expect the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect's second senior brother Chen Lan to also be in the Hengshan region. After Chen Lan heard the news, he rushed to intercept Jiang Tianxing and snatch the 2 refining geniuses. Hearing this, Ji Tianxing frowned. 100 Refinement Ancient Sect? Second disciple Chen Lan? Jiang Tianyi raised his head and looked at him, asking, "Young Master Tianxing, you know about the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect? You know Chen Lan?" Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "As for the 100 Refinements Ancient Sect, you mentioned it before. Just like the Jiang clan, the Nangong clan, and the Raging Flame Grotto, it's an ancient clan that's proficient in crafting weapons. However, to be honest, the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect's knowledge of refining is slightly better than the other clans." Chapter 3466. Jiang Tianyi's expression was a little gloomy. "Young Master Tianxing, although I admit that you are speaking the truth, I am not convinced." Cough cough. Ji Tianxing coughed to cover up his embarrassment and comforted him. "It's fine. It is normal for the big clans to rise and fall. It is only a matter of time before the Jiang clan surpasses the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect." Jiang Tianyi felt a little better and continued, "The 100 Refinement Ancient Sect has always been arrogant and has old grudges with the Jiang clan. They have always been fighting openly and secretly. However, ninth brother recruited 2 blacksmithing geniuses first. What right did Chen Lan have to snatch them? Ninth brother and Chen Lan had an argument and started fighting. In the end, ninth brother suffered a loss, but Chen Lan did not let it go and insisted on snatching the 2 blacksmithing geniuses. How preposterous! This is too much." Speaking of this matter, Jiang Tianyi was filled with indignation and anger. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked, "Then what do you plan to do? Go to the Hengshan region to help your ninth brother?" Jiang Tianyi frowned and said in a low voice, "Ninth brother and I have a good relationship. He is in trouble, so I should help him. However, I want to bring you back to the Jiang clan, and now we are surrounded by so many god kings. The situation is so dangerous, I cannot complicate things." Ji Tianxing continued, "However, if you don't help, not only will your ninth brother be bullied, but the 2 blacksmithing geniuses will also be snatched away." Jiang Tianyi hesitated for a moment before gritting his teeth and making a decision. "It's fine. Ninth brother rarely goes out and is inexperienced. I'll let him gain some experience with this matter. No matter how overboard Chen Lan is, he won't dare to do anything to ninth brother. Otherwise, it will cause a war between the 2 clans. As for the 2 blacksmithing geniuses, it doesn't matter if they are snatched away. We can just find them in the future." Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "All right, you can make the decision." After speaking, he prepared to return to the secret room and continue cultivating in the God Pagoda. However, at this moment, another ray of light flew in from the sky and landed in front of Jiang Tianyi. The ray of light dispersed and a transmission jade slip appeared. Jiang Tianyi hurriedly took the jade slip and read the message inside. After a moment, his face became gloomy and serious. "Young Master Tianxing, the friend from Shimi Grotto Heaven has replied to my letter." Ji Tianxing also had a bad premonition when he saw his solemn expression and solemn tone. "What's the situation?" Jiang Tianyi said in a heavy tone. My friend found out that the Red Dragon domain looks calm on the surface, but a huge storm is brewing. The domain lords of the surrounding domains seem to be rushing to the Red Dragon domain. Moreover, not only were there more than 10 area masters rushing over, it seemed like there were 2 divine envoys as well. They might meet up in the Red Dragon domain and give us a thunderous blow. Ji Tianxing nodded to show that he understood. He smiled and said, their target is not us but me. Jiang Tianyi was very smart and understood what he meant. He hurriedly said, Young Master Tianxing, you are looking down on me. I'm not afraid of those divine envoys and region lords. I won't back down. I want to fight alongside you and bring you back to the divine attraction paradise. Ji Tianxing smiled again and said, You must know that you represent the Jiang clan of the divine attraction paradise. You can't just say what you want. Moreover, your 9th brother is being bullied in the Hengshan region. You should go there to help him. Jiang Tianyi said firmly, Young Master Tianxing, you are the benefactor of the Jiang clan. Now that you are in trouble, how can we just sit by and do nothing? As for going to the Hengshan region to help my 9th brother, I think it's a good idea. Let's go together. Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. Divine Envoy Xing Xiang must have gathered more than 10 area masters in the Red Dragon domain. He must have set up a trap. Since that's the case, there's no need for us to fight him head-on. Let's take a detour to the Hengshan region. If they continued to fly south, they would pass through the entire Red Dragon domain. It would take at least half a month. However, the Hengshan region was southwest of the Red Dragon domain. They could avoid Divine Envoy Xing Xiang's ambush by taking a detour. Originally, Jiang Tianyi didn't want to go to the Hengshan region to help Jiang Tianxing. Now that he knew about Divine Envoy Xing Xiang's scheme and Ji Tianxing's agreement, he changed direction and flew to the Hengshan region. 10 days later, Heaven Dragon Pass in the southern part of the Red Dragon domain. It was located at the southern border of the Red Dragon domain. 100,000 miles south would be out of the Red Dragon domain. Heaven Dragon Pass was located in a towering mountain range. The mountains were steep and the cliffs were tens of thousands of feet high. Compared to the Manchuan Pass in the Fire Mulberry domain, this pass was smaller but the terrain was more dangerous. Originally, this was the border between the 2 domains. It was an important pass and a place to fight for. However, the boundless Heaven continent had been peaceful for thousands of years. There were no wars between the domains. Normally, there were only 100,000 soldiers stationed at Heaven Dragon Pass. Moreover, the 100,000 soldiers were relatively free. They spent their days patrolling and cultivating. Until 10 days ago, the peace of Heaven Dragon Pass was broken. First, the area master of the Red Dragon domain led several emperors and more than 200 Sir God experts to Heaven Dragon Pass. The 100,000 soldiers were ready for battle. They were ready to listen to the orders of the area master and the emperors. Then, the area master of the Red Dragon domain and his deputy worked together to set up a divine array. The emperors, more than 200 Sir God experts, and the 100,000 soldiers helped. In 10 days, they set up 3 king-level divine arrays. Heaven Dragon Pass became impregnable. It was surrounded by divine arrays. Its lethality was terrifying. During this time, the area masters of other domains led a large number of Sir God experts and arrived at Heaven Dragon Pass. These area masters and Sir God experts did not rest after arriving at Heaven Dragon Pass. They also joined the ranks of setting up divine arrays. The entire Heaven Dragon Pass was filled with a tense and austere atmosphere. Everyone knew that an earth-shattering battle was about to arrive very soon. Just like the Manchuan Pass in the Fire Mulberry domain. Until today, there were 17 area masters and more than 20 Sir God experts gathered in Heaven Dragon Pass. Tonight, a few more super noble God Kings arrived at the Heaven Dragon Mountain Pass mysteriously and silently. The 100,000 soldiers were not qualified to know their identities. However, the 20 Sir God experts gathered in the Commander-in-Chief's palace saw their true faces. There were 4 of them. 3 of them were honorable divine envoys. Divine Envoy Xing Xiang was the leader. Divine Envoy Ku Yun and Divine Envoy Zhan Ying assisted. As for the 4th Sir God, it was the area master of the neighboring Fire Mulberry domain, Sir God King Bai Feng. All the Sir God experts present had heard of the battle at Manchuan Pass and Sir God King Bai Feng's encounter. Everyone looked at Bai Feng with eyes full of sympathy. Bai Feng did not say anything. She stood silently among the many Sir God experts. She was not conspicuous. Divine Envoy Xing Xiang's injuries had not healed. However, it did not seem to affect him on the surface. His face was gloomy. His eyes were sharp. His entire body was filled with killing intent. His gaze swept across the many Sir God experts in the hall. He said in a deep voice, "The traitors led by Tianxing went all the way south and killed several area masters and Sir God experts. This is the first time such a thing has happened in 1,000 years. It is simply appalling. It is so cruel that it makes one's hair stand on end. I do not wish to speak any more nonsense. In short, we have gathered a large number of troops this time. 30 Sir God experts are overseeing. We must kill them at Heaven Dragon Pass. If we let them escape, everyone here will take their own lives to atone for their sins. Including me." Chapter 3467. There was dead silence in the hall. The air was heavy and oppressive. Everyone could clearly feel the determination of Stellar Aspect Divine Envoy. But they were not worried or afraid. Instead, they were full of confidence. Nonsense. 30 God King experts, close to 1,000 God monarchs, and 100,000 soldiers. With such a grand lineup, not to mention dealing with a few foreign race God Kings, even annihilating 2 God envoy teams would not be a problem. As long as those foreign race God Kings passed through Heaven Dragon Pass, they would die without a doubt. This plan was set. Everyone only needed to wait patiently. However, it was because those foreign race God Kings had not appeared and their whereabouts were unknown that Stellar Aspect was uneasy. He looked at the night sky outside the hall and muttered to himself with a dark expression, "According to the speed of those traitors, they should be arriving at Heaven Dragon Pass soon." God Envoy Ku Yun and God Envoy Zhan Ying nodded in agreement. "That's right. Next, everyone should enter a state of combat readiness and hide their auras as much as possible, waiting for those traitors to walk into the trap. With the lesson learned at Flowing River Pass, they will definitely be more cautious. So, we need to make some preparations and send a few scouts to search the vicinity. As long as those traitors pass through Heaven Dragon Pass, they will die without a burial place. But the only uncertainty is whether they will pass through Heaven Dragon Pass or not. By the way, Stellar Aspect, didn't you say that this God King Bai Feng has extraordinary talent and can detect the traitors' whereabouts? Why don't you let him check where those traitors are now? How far are they from Heaven Dragon Pass?" The gazes of the 2 God envoys landed on the crowd and gathered on Bai Feng. More than 20 God King experts also looked at him with burning eyes. Many of them had jealousy hidden in their eyes. After all, Bai Feng could attract the attention and high regard of the 3 God envoys. He would definitely have good fortune in the future. Stellar Aspect nodded slightly and looked at Bai Feng. He said, "Bai Feng, you have the talent of God's eye. You can predict fortune and misfortune, and deduce heavenly secrets. Moreover, you have met those traitors and fought with them before. You are not unfamiliar with their situation. At this crucial moment, I will have to trouble you to cast a spell and deduce their whereabouts." Stellar Aspect's status was higher than Bai Feng's, but he was not as strong as Bai Feng and they were old friends. In front of so many God Kings, Stellar Aspect Divine Emissary was very polite to him. Bai Feng naturally did not dare to decline. He also knew that his biggest purpose in coming to Tian Long Mountain Pass was not to participate in the battle. Instead, He used his divine eyes of annihilation to help everyone search for Ji Tianqing and the others. This king will naturally obey Lord Stellar Aspect Envoy's orders. Bai Feng cupped his hands and bowed. He then walked out of the crowd and stood in the middle of the hall. The other god kings retreated in a hurry. They stood at the edge of the hall and watched Bai Feng cast her technique quietly. Bai Feng took out 9 mysterious flags and planted them on the ground of the palace to form a simple divine formation. After that, he withdrew an ancient fiery copper geomantic compass and sat cross-legged on the ground. 3 divine envoys, please lend me a hand. Bai Feng made her request. The 3 divine envoys did not hesitate and quickly followed his instructions. They stood in different positions and cast spells to assist him. Next, Bai Feng focused on using a secret technique. She activated the Annihilation Divine Eye and deduced the location of the Palace of Heaven's Will. The hall was silent, and time passed quietly. 4 hours quickly passed. Many of the god kings were getting impatient. They secretly transmitted their voices to each other and questioned whether Bai Feng was reliable or not. Fortunately, Bai Feng's technique was nearing its end, and he had finally deduced the result. The 9 mysterious flags all shone with a dazzling divine light. The fiery copper geomantic compass in his hand also released a 7-colored divine light. 10 streaks of divine light converged above his head, forming a screen of light that resembled a sea of stars. It was dazzling, vast, and profound. A boundless and vast aura emanated from the screen of light. The 20-odd god kings in the hall, including the 3 divine envoys, all wore solemn expressions. A hint of respect and wariness arose in their hearts. The god kings who had secretly doubted Bai Feng all shut their mouth. They did not dare to doubt him anymore. As the saying went, once an expert made a move, the truth would be revealed. Among the 30 god kings, Bai Feng was not the strongest. He could only be ranked in the top 5. However, his divine ability and consummate skill had shocked everyone. Soon, a hazy and blurry image appeared on the light screen that was as vast as the starry sky. A blurry divine ship streaked across the sky and sea of clouds like a bolt of lightning and landed in the middle of a towering mountain range. If one looked carefully, they would discover that there seemed to be an ancient city in the depths of the mountain range. However, the image stopped there and quickly dissipated. Whoosh! The screen of light dissipated. The 9 flags and the fiery copper geomantic compass fell silent and became dim. Bai Feng ended his technique and opened his eyes. The 20-odd god kings stared at him. The 3 divine envoys could not wait to ask about the result. How was it? Did you find their whereabouts? Bai Feng, where are those traitors now? Are they close to the Heaven Dragon Pass? Facing the 3 divine envoys' anxious gazes, Bai Feng's expression was a little strange. He pondered for a moment before putting away the 9 flags and the fiery copper geomantic compass. The divine eye of annihilation on his forehead also closed. Seeing his strange expression, divine envoy Xing Xiang asked even more anxiously, Bai Feng, what happened? Tell me. Bai Feng hesitated for a moment before saying in a low voice, Lord Divine Envoys, those traitors are very far away from us. They are not in the Red Dragon domain. The 3 divine envoys' eyes widened when they heard this. The 20-odd god kings were also stunned and could not help but exclaim, What? Not in the Red Dragon domain? Are you kidding me? Did we do all this for nothing? Bai Feng, you must be mistaken, right? I just said that he's definitely not reliable. Divining heavenly secrets and predicting good or bad luck. That's ridiculous. I can't believe you can say such ridiculous things. The originally silent hall exploded with discussions, exclamations, and doubts. Bai Feng became the target of public criticism and was criticized and denied by many god kings. Divine Envoy Xing Xiang's expression was gloomy. He waved his hand to signal for everyone to be quiet. He stared at Bai Feng with a dignified gaze and asked seriously, By Feng, our spies clearly detected that those traders passed through the Fire Mulberry domain and went south into the Red Dragon domain. Are you sure they are not in the Red Dragon domain now? Others did not believe Bai Feng, but he did. Bai Feng nodded and said with certainty, I'm very sure. Then where are they? Divine Envoy Xing Xiang asked. Bai Feng frowned and thought for a moment before replying, in the southwest, in the Hengshan domain. It seems to be in the Hengshan Empire. The 20-odd God Kings were still questioning and discussing Bai Feng, but Divine Envoy Xing Xiang suppressed them with a dignified manner. He discussed with Ku Yun and Zhan Ying for a moment and quickly made a decision. Pick 15 God Kings to stay at Heaven Dragon Pass and wait for orders. The other 11 God Kings are to immediately rush to the Hengshan Empire. Bai Feng, come with us first and rush there as fast as you can. Chapter 3468. This was the decision made by the 3 divine messengers after a discussion. The 20 or so God Kings present had no right to question him. They could only obey. Moreover, Bai Feng spoke with certainty and certainty. The many God Kings found it hard to refute. Since the 3 divine envoys believed that it was true, then he would take it as true for the time being. Soon, the 3 groups of people were selected and prepared. Of the 15 God Kings, 6 of them were domain lords. All of them were left in the Heaven Dragon Pass, waiting for the next target. This was also in case Bai Feng's calculation was wrong. If Ji Tianxing and the others entered the Tianlong Pass, they would at least have enough power to eliminate them. The other 11 God Kings were led by a higher God King as they drove their divine ships towards the Hengshan Empire. As for the 3 divine envoys and Bai Feng, they took the lead and left Tianlong Pass on a top king-grade divine artifact. That divine artifact was called the Void-Piercing Hairpin. It was said that it was a relic left behind by the mother of the Shadow Executioner Divine Envoy. It wasn't an offensive or defensive divine artifact. Instead, it was a flying divine artifact that could travel through space and travel through outer space. In the boundless universe, the sky-piercing hairpin could travel thousands of miles in an instant. Flying in the divine realm, one's speed would increase by several folds. Ordinary God Kings would need half a month to reach Hengshan region's Hengshan Empire. As for the 3 divine envoys and Bai Feng, relying on the power of the space-piercing hairpin, they would only need about 5 days to arrive. The reason why the 4 of them went first was that the space inside the hairpin was limited and could not fit so many people. If he wanted to continuously teleport and travel through space, he would have to expend a huge amount of divine power. The 4 of them had to take turns to replenish the sky-piercing hairpin with divine power. Moreover, with each additional person, the consumption of divine power would multiply. If it wasn't for the fact that Bai Feng possessed the divine eyes of annihilation, he would still need to deduce the heavenly secrets to find Ji Tianxing and the others. With God Envoy Zhaneying's personality, he probably wouldn't even want to bring him along. Hengshan Region, Hengshan Empire. In the endless Changle mountain range, there was a majestic ancient city that had existed for 10,000 years. It was called Changle City. This city was located in a remote area, in a vast mountain range with a radius of a few million miles. Usually, the number of gods and commoners that came to this place was far fewer than the other main cities of the Hengshan Empire. However, Changle City was located on top of a divine vein, so the divine power of heaven and earth was abundant. The millions of miles of mountain range around the majestic city contained an endless supply of cultivation resources and treasures. As a result, the millions of celestial citizens in Perpetual Joy City were blessed by the heavens. They had countless experts and geniuses. After tens of thousands of years, the city still showed signs of vicissitudes. However, the city was exceptionally prosperous and prosperous. More than 6 million people of the god race lived and worked in peace. It was quite lively. The various trades and professions related to the cultivation of the divine way had also developed and expanded to the peak. Every few years or decades, Changle City would have a few great grandmasters who specialized in alchemy, artifact forging, or formations. Of course, those were all Divine Lord Realm powerhouses. If they were older, they would be respected by the people and would be recruited by the powerful forces of the Empire. However, every few decades, a few younger grandmasters would emerge. This was the proverbial genius. All kinds of alchemy geniuses, artifact forging geniuses, array formation geniuses. The citizens of Changle City were already used to it. A few months ago, Jiang Tianxing shouldered the Jiang clan's recruitment mission and came to the Hengshan Empire. After many searches and tests, he still couldn't find the ideal refining genius. Unknowingly, he heard that Changle City was blessed by the heavens and had many geniuses. Therefore, Jiang Tianxing came to Changle City full of anticipation and started to search for a target. He was different from Jiang Tianni. Jiang Tianni wanted to save time and directly occupied a land with a spirit vein. He spread the news to the outside world and challenged all the artifact forging grandmasters. In order to attract those artifact forging grandmasters, he pretended to be arrogant and set generous rewards. Then, he would choose a suitable person from the many artifact forging grandmasters. Jiang Tianxing kept a low profile and wandered around Changle City, secretly observing and looking for a suitable target. Speaking of which, his luck was not bad. 10 days ago, 2 young geniuses had set up an arena at 100 Flower Garden in the southern part of the city and competed in terms of strength and artifact forging. After asking around, Jiang Tianxing found out that those 2 young geniuses were the most famous young geniuses in Changle City in the past 100 years. One of them was the first young master of a grand family called Lin Zhen. The other was the first senior brother of Changle Dao College called Zhan Longxiang. Both of them were very young and had just become high-level divine lords not long ago. They were skilled in artifact forging. As the saying went, a mountain could not accommodate 2 tigers. Moreover, these 2 top geniuses were equally proud and arrogant. Apart from cultivating the divine Tao, they were also skilled in artifact forging. The citizens of Changle City were divided into 2 factions, each supporting Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang. The 2 factions often argued and felt that their idols were the number 1 geniuses. For the title of number 1 genius of Changle City, Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang had been at odds with each other for many years. This time, the 2 geniuses argued again and competed in front of everyone in 100 Flower Garden to determine a winner. Jiang Tianxing snuck into 100 Flower Garden and observed the entire process. In the end, Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang were equally matched in strength. After fighting for half a day, there was still no winner. The 2 changed to artifact forging to see who could forge a supreme-grade monarch artifact faster. In the end, there was still no winner. Both of them took the same amount of time and created divine artifacts with their own merit. The spectating citizens were not satisfied and were used to this result. However, Jiang Tianxing was ecstatic because he had picked up a treasure. This was because Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang were the young geniuses he was looking for. He was confident that as long as he recruited these 2 geniuses into the Jiang clan and nurtured them well, they would become divine blacksmiths in the future. As for loyalty, Jiang Tianxing was not worried because the Jiang clan had rules. Anyone who entered the Jiang clan with a different surname had to marry a member of the Jiang clan to be recognized by the Jiang clan. This way, their descendants would also have the bloodline of the Jiang clan. This way, the Jiang clan would be able to absorb new blood and strengthen their foundation. Jiang Tianxing used a little trick to find Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang and tried to recruit them. The 2 geniuses were very proud, but Jiang Tianxing's casual demonstration of his skills stunned them. Then, he revealed his identity and background, as well as his strength as a middle-level divine blacksmith, which won the respect of the 2 geniuses. With his glib tongue, the 2 geniuses understood the Jiang clan's strong foundation and saw the hope of becoming divine blacksmith. Therefore, the two geniuses were willing to follow Jiang Tianxing and cultivate in the Jiang clan. However, something awkward happened. When the agreed time came, Jiang Tianxing wanted to bring the two geniuses out of Chang'e City, but they both changed their minds. The reason was simple. The two geniuses were like fire and water. If there was one, there would be no other. No matter how Jiang Tianxing tried to persuade or mediate, the two geniuses would not give in. He could only bring one of them with him. At this moment, the second disciple of the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect, Chun Lan, appeared. Chapter 3469. The 100 Refinement Ancient Sect and the Jiang clan had an old grudge that hadn't been resolved even after thousands of years. Although Kenshin had helped the Jiang clan to tide over the crisis and suppressed the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect in the past, the Jiang clan was still in danger. However, the 100 Refinements Ancient Sect would never forget this grudge. However, the boundless heaven continent was unified, and the Azura God Emperor controlled the world, desiring to disintegrate the various great ancient clans. The 18 ancient clans had no choice but to form an alliance. The 100 Refinement Ancient Sect could only suppress their hatred and temporarily not fight with the Jiang clan to avoid destroying the ancient clan alliance. But even so, it was inevitable for them to fight in the dark. Jiang Tianxing had left the Divine Attraction Paradise not only to gain experience in the mortal world, but also to take on the mission of recruiting disciples. However, Chun Lan was different. He was only using an excuse to leave the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect to settle some old grudges in the Hengshan Empire. Coincidentally, he came to Perpetual Joy City and sensed the aura of a divine king expert. Only then did he find Jiang Tianxing. Then, he learned that Jiang Tianxing had recruited 2 refining geniuses, so he wanted to snatch them away. The Jiang clan wanted to absorb new blood, but so did the 100 Refinements Ancient Sect. In fact, the 18 ancient clans had to constantly absorb geniuses from other clans in order to maintain their prosperity for tens of thousands of years. Moreover, Chun Lan knew that the two geniuses were not on good terms with each other, so she was even more determined to snatch him away. He also found 2 geniuses and used his identity as a disciple of the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect to recruit them. Furthermore, he praised the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect to the heavens and banished the Jiang clan to the ground. He wanted to kidnap the 2 geniuses back. However, the 2 geniuses were very stubborn and were resolutely unwilling to travel with each other. Chun Lan could only think of another way. When Jiang Tianxing found out about this, he went to confront Chun Lan in a fit of rage. When the two of them met, it was inevitable that they would quarrel, ridicule, and humiliate each other. Afterwards, the two of them got into a conflict and fought fiercely in the mountains outside the city, destroying tens of thousands of li of mountains and rivers. Chun Lan was the second senior brother of the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect. He had cultivated for 10,000 years and was at the peak of the 6th level of the God King realm. Jiang Tianxing was the 9th young master of the Jiang clan. He had only cultivated for 7,000 years and was at the 5th level of the Divine King realm. The result was obvious. Jiang Tianxing was at a disadvantage and even suffered some injuries. Fortunately, both of them restrained themselves. It was more of a spar, and neither of them dared to use too much force. If things got out of hand and the Jiang clan started a war with the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect, they would definitely be blamed by the other clans. After the conflict, Jiang Tianxing felt wronged and sent a message to Jiang Tianyi asking for help. The matter of recruiting the 2 geniuses had reached a stalemate. Both Jiang Tianxing and Chun Lan were caught between a rock and a hard place. They could only try their best to persuade the 2 geniuses. It was a little unrealistic to take in both geniuses. However, both of them were unwilling to accept only one and give the other to the other. Of course, it wasn't as if they hadn't considered kidnapping the 2 geniuses by force. But he couldn't do that. After all, the Jiang clan and the 100 Refinements ancient sect could not afford to lose face like this. The primordial ancient clan had once stood at the peak of the continent, looking down on the common people. Now, if they wanted to recruit disciples from other clans, they actually had to resort to robbery? This was too humiliating. The sun was setting. In the Green Phoenix Manor, north of Chang'e City, Ji Tianxing, Jiang Tianyi, and Jiang Tianxing sat at the stone table under the pine tree, calmly drinking tea. This manor was located at the peak of Green Phoenix Peak, 800 miles north of Chang'e City. The entire manor was shrouded in clouds. The three of them sat in the manor, overlooking the nearby Chang'e City. Jiang Tianxing rubbed his brows in distress and said to Jiang Tianyi, "Seventh brother, the situation is like this. That brat Qinlan is unreasonable and despicable. No matter what, we can't let him have his way. Otherwise, the Jiang clan will be humiliated and I won't be able to raise my head in front of him in the future." Jiang Tianyi nodded slightly and said calmly, "Although Qinlan is strong, there is nothing to be afraid of. We'll go and meet him later. The main problem now is that the two young geniuses are competing with each other and can't tolerate each other. If we want to bring both of them back to the Jiang clan, we have to find a way to resolve the conflict and persuade them." Jiang Tianxing nodded and said, "Yes. Qinlan saw this point and pestered us relentlessly. He won't give up no matter what. His goal is clear. He has to snatch at least one of the young geniuses. If he works harder and manages to snatch both of them, he'll have profited greatly. This brat is too shameless. I was the one who discovered the two geniuses first." At the mention of this matter, Jiang Tianxing was filled with anger and kept complaining. Although he and Jiang Tianyi were half-brothers, their height and appearance were very similar, but Jiang Tianyi was different. However, there was a clear difference in the way they dressed and their temperament. Jiang Tianyi had a head of white hair and wore a robe made of crane feathers. His clothes were snow-white and his personality was more stable. Jiang Tianxing, on the other hand, had a head of golden hair and wore dark gold armor. He carried a divine sword on his back and his personality was more impulsive and immature. The two brothers discussed for a while but couldn't think of a feasible solution. Ji Tianxing, who had been silent all this time, spoke up at the right time. "The situation isn't complicated. We can't let Qinlan have his way, and we can't forcefully kidnap the two geniuses. Let's go find Qinlan and force him to back down. Then, we'll find the two young geniuses and think of a way to persuade them to bring them back to the Jiang clan. There's no time to lose. Let's act quickly." Jiang Tianyi nodded and stood up subconsciously. Jiang Tianxing sat on the stone chair and turned his head to look at Ji Tianxing. He frowned and asked Jiang Tianyi, "Seventh brother, who is this person? Didn't I introduce him to you just now?" Jiang Tianyi glared at him unhappily. "This is young Master Tianxing, my friend." Jiang Tianxing frowned again and asked softly, "Seventh brother, this is a grudge between the Jiang clan and the 100 Refinements ancient sect. It's not appropriate for you to bring an outsider into this matter, right?" Jiang Tianyi purposely put on a stern face and slapped the back of his head. He said unhappily, "Little Jiao, be more polite to young Master Tianxing. Don't be rude. He's one of us, not an outsider. He's just a friend and not a disciple of the Jiang clan. How can he not be an outsider?" Jiang Tianxing held the back of his head and muttered, "If we really bring him to deal with Qinlan, the 100 Refinements ancient sect will definitely use this as an excuse and will be criticized by the other clans." Jiang Tianyi became even angrier and stared at him with a stern face. He shouted coldly, "Little Jiao, can you not be so stubborn? You don't believe me, right? Do you want me to tell you his true identity before you'll stop?" Hearing this, Jiang Tianxing's eyes lit up. He looked up expectantly and asked, "What do you mean, seventh brother? What other identity does he have? Tell me quickly." Jiang Tianyi realized that he had let it slip in a moment of desperation. However, Jiang Tianxing didn't let it go and insisted on telling him the answer. Jiang Tianyi was annoyed and could only sigh. He said solemnly, "Little Jiu, I'm only telling you this because you're my brother. However, you must keep it a secret." Jiang Tianxing was filled with anticipation and excitement. He nodded like a chick pecking at rice. Jiang Tianyi said with a serious face, "This young Master Tianxing is the great benefactor who saved our Jiang clan 1,000 years ago. Second uncle and third uncle are his in-name disciples. He's our Master Grandpa." Huh! Jiang Tianxing was petrified. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3470. Master Grandpa? Seventh brother, are you sure? I've never heard that you have such a friend. You didn't manage to recruit any armament refining geniuses and instead found a Master Grandpa for us? Jiang Tianxing regained his senses and was filled with disbelief and unwillingness. He looked at Jiang Tianyi and Ji Tianxing strangely. How can the benefactor who saved the Jiang clan 1,100 years ago be so young? Jiang Tianyi frowned. Ninth brother, can you not be so shallow? Isn't it normal for an expert like young Master Tianxing to remain young forever? Jiang Tianxing still didn't believe him and asked again. Since that benefactor could save the Jiang clan and make second uncle and third uncle admire him, he must be at least a peak god king. Even if he isn't a peak god king, he should be a ninth stage realm upper-level god king, right? What about this young Master Tianxing? What realm is he at now? Ugh! Jiang Tianyi was speechless and couldn't answer. No choice, he couldn't see through Ji Tianxing's cultivation realm. He could only see that Ji Tianxing's aura was restrained and his power was unfathomable. However, he recalled that Ji Tianxing had fought with Bai Feng for a long time and he wasn't able to defeat her. It was imaginable that Ji Tianxing shouldn't be a upper-level god king. Even if he was, his power should be about the same as Bai Feng, around the 7th stage of the god king realm. This was indeed a suspicious point that couldn't be explained. Jiang Tianxing stared at him and asked, "Seventh brother, why aren't you talking?" Jiang Tianyi frowned and said sternly, "Ninth brother, how can you be so rude to question someone's cultivation realm? Anyway, you only need to know that young Master Tianxing can deal with Chunlan from the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect." Really? Jiang Tianxing was still suspicious and sized up Ji Tianxing before asking Jiang Tianyi, "Seventh brother, you can't joke about this. Since you're sure that he's the benefactor of the Jiang clan, why didn't you report to the clan leader?" Jiang Tianyi stared at him and said, "What's the use of reporting to the clan leader? Young Master Tianxing has already agreed to return to the Divine Attraction Paradise with me. At that time, I want to give everyone a surprise." Hee. Jiang Tianxing put on a fake smile and curled his lip. "Anyway, this is your idea. It has nothing to do with me. Don't drag me into it." "You!" Jiang Tianyi clenched his teeth in anger, wishing he could beat him up. This clearly showed that they didn't believe him and felt that he was fooling around. They were afraid that they would be implicated by him and be punished by the patriarch. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing said indifferently, "Jiang Tianxing, whether you believe it or not, let's put this matter aside for now. The most important thing right now is to have Jiang Tianyi accompany you to find Chunlan and resolve this matter as soon as possible. We don't have much time to waste." With his reminder, Jiang Tianyi finally remembered that stellar aspect divine envoy, domain lords, and god kings were searching for them. The Hengshan region was right next to the Crimson Dragon region. If they were delayed for too long, there was no guarantee that Divine King Stellar Aspect and company would not come looking for them. Therefore, this matter had to be resolved quickly. Yes. Jiang Tianyi hurriedly nodded and said to Jiang Tianxing, "Ninth brother, where is Chunlan? Let's go find him now. This matter cannot be delayed, lest something unexpected happens." Jiang Tianxing pointed to the southwest of Changel City and said, That guy is at the Gold Laurel Palace. Alright, let's go meet him now. Jiang Tianyi nodded and pulled Jiang Tianxing into the sky, flying towards Changle City. After flying for 1,000 feet, he realized that Ji Tianxing did not follow and was still standing in the manor. Moreover, Ji Tianxing sat back on the stone bench and continued drinking tea. Jiang Tianyi was stunned and asked without hesitation, "Young Master Tianxing, why aren't you coming with us?" Ji Tianxing nodded and smiled. "It's enough for the two of you to go. I'll wait here for your good news." Jiang Tianyi was immediately put in a difficult position. He smiled bitterly and said, "Young Master Tianxing, if you don't come with us, I don't feel confident." Jiang Tianxing curled his lips and looked at Ji Tianxing with a smile that was not a smile. He said, "You don't dare to go? Are you afraid that, if we really fight, you'll be exposed?" As soon as he finished speaking, Jiang Tianyi slapped him on the back of his head and said unhappily, "If you don't know how to speak, then shut up." Jiang Tianxing saw that his seventh brother was really angry and obediently shut up. Jiang Tianyi flew back to the manor and came before Ji Tianxing. He bowed sincerely and said, "Young Master Tianxing, my ninth brother is young and inexperienced. He has always lived in the divine attraction grotto heaven, and this is the first time he has gone out to train. Therefore, he spoke without thinking and offended you. Please don't lower yourself to his level." Jiang Tianxing was the ninth genius of the Jiang clan and was called the ninth young master. He had a noble status. In the divine attraction grotto heaven, he was used to living like a prince. However, he had lived for 7,000 years and was called young and inexperienced by Jiang Tianyi. Ji Tianxing was speechless. After all, he had lived for less than 2,000 years in both lifetimes. There was no comparison between people. However, since Jiang Tianyi said so, he had to go. Otherwise, it would seem that he was too petty and would really argue with Jiang Tianxing. Helpless, Ji Tianxing could only nod and say, "Jiang Tianyi, you misunderstand. Since you insist on inviting me, then I'll go with you." Seeing that he agreed, Jiang Tianyi breathed a sigh of relief. Then, the three of them flew through the sky and went straight to the Gold Osmanthus Palace in the southwest of Changle City. The sun gradually set and night was about to arrive. The Gold Osmanthus Palace was lit. Chun Lan, dressed in a black robe, was sitting in the study and carefully reading a book. He looked like a young man in his 30s. He was tall and muscular, with thick eyebrows and big eyes. Behind him stood a white-haired elder in a black robe, dressed like a bodyguard. He stood with his hands by his side. "Young Master Lan, this is the detailed information on Lin Zhen and the Battle Dragon Elephant, including the Lin clan and Changle Dao College. I have investigated it thoroughly. I think that, if we want to recruit these two blacksmithing geniuses, we can find another breakthrough and have a chance." Chun Lan nodded and said, "Okay, then I will take a good look at this information." At this moment, the voice of a guard sounded at the door of the study. "Sir, there is a young man with the surname Jiang outside. He wants to see you." Obviously, only the white-haired elder was from the 100 Refinement Ancient sect. He followed Chun Lan to serve and protect him. All the guards and maids in the Gold Osmanthus Palace were from Changle City. However, Chun Lan had spent a considerable amount of money to rent this palace temporarily. "Jiang Tianxing? That brat is here to humiliate himself again?" Chun Lan closed the book and put it into his spatial ring. His lips curled into a cold smile. "Uncle Yen, let's go see what that brat is up to." With that, he brought Uncle Yen out of the study and rushed to the guest hall. In the hall, Ji Tianxing, Jiang Tianxing, and Jiang Tianyi were all seated and drinking tea. As soon as Chun Lan entered the hall, he laughed mockingly and said, "Jiang Tianxing, was the beating from before not enough? Do you want to be beaten again tonight?" Chapter 3471. His voice was heard before he even saw him. Chun Lan's arrogant tone caused Jiang Tianxing's face to turn green. His eyes were filled with anger. He immediately stood up and retorted coldly, "Chun Lan, don't be so smug. Tonight, my seventh brother will teach you a lesson and let you know the immensity of heaven and earth." As soon as Jiang Tianqing finished speaking, Chun Lan appeared in the main hall with the white-robed old man. He glanced at Jiang Tianqing before his gaze landed on Jiang Tianyi and Ji Tianqing. As for Ji Tianqing, he only glanced at him and skipped over him. After all, Ji Tianqing was drinking tea with a calm expression. His aura was restrained and he was as low-key as an ordinary person. On the other hand, Jiang Tianyi's face was stern and his body emitted a divine aura that could not be underestimated. Chun Lan sized Jiang Tianyi up and sneered, "Haha, did you beat up the small one and then the big one came? Jiang Tianqing, you're really something. You're a piece of trash and you asked your brother to support you? I was wondering why you suddenly became so bold and dared to take the initiative to come here. So it's because you found a backer." As he spoke, Chun Lan sat down on the main seat and said disdainfully, "It's a pity that your seventh brother, Jiang Tianyi, is not my match. You guys are destined to be humiliated." Chun Lan's words and attitude were extremely arrogant. He did not put Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianyi in his eyes at all. Jiang Tianyi's face turned green as he clenched his fists tightly. Jiang Tianyi, on the other hand, was calm. He looked at Chun Lan with a cold smile and said mockingly, "My ninth brother is the youngest among the 9 geniuses of the Jiang clan and is ranked last. You, the second senior brother of the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect, are proud of defeating him and are still acting so smug. It seems like the disciples of the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect are only so capable." "What did you say?" Chun Lan's face darkened and his eyes were filled with anger. Jiang Tianyi laughed even more mockingly and said, "Although I'm only ranked 7th among the 9 disciples of the Jiang clan, it's still enough. Against you, the second senior brother of the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect, it's enough. You dare to look down on me?" Chun Lan's expression darkened as he growled angrily, "Kid, if I don't teach you an unforgettable lesson, you won't know how powerful I am." As he spoke, his entire body burst forth with surging divine power aura. Clearly, he was about to attack. But Jiang Tianyi smiled contemptuously and said, "Talking to a boor like you is really tiring. Very angry, right? You want to fight, don't you? It's a pity that Lin Zhen and the Battle Dragon Elephant are not going to compete in fighting, but in refining weapons." Chun Lan frowned deeply and remained silent. Indeed, he had defeated Jiang Tianqing. However, Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang were not persuaded by him to follow him back to the 100 Refinements Ancient Sect. After a moment of silence, he asked, "So what you mean is, you want to compete with me in refining?" "Of course." Jiang Tianyi sneered with a mocking expression. "We're all disciples of forging families. What else can we compete in? Could it be that they were going to have a duel? Then let our second brother compete with you. I guarantee that he will beat you up so badly that even your mother won't be able to recognize you. You're courting death." Chun Lan was so angry that his face turned black and his chest rose and fell rapidly. The white-haired elder frowned slightly and hurriedly sent a message to remind him, "Young Master Lan, please calm down. The other party obviously came prepared and purposely provoked you." Only then did Chun Lan come to his senses and nod silently. He then looked at Jiang Tianyi and asked, "Tell me, how do you want to compete?" Jiang Tianyi answered without hesitation, "We'll compete to see who can successfully forge the most perfect divine weapon in the shortest amount of time. Whoever loses will withdraw from this competition and will not be allowed to touch the 2 forging geniuses." Seeing how confident Jiang Tianyi was, Chun Lan was stunned and frowned as he considered it. From what I know, Jiang Tianyi's forging skills can only be considered above average. His experience, skills, and maturity should be slightly weaker than mine. I can't possibly lose to him. But for him to be so confident, does he have something to rely on? Thinking of this, Chun Lan became more cautious and asked Jiang Tianyi, Where will we compete? When will we compete? Will you compete with me? He had to ask clearly to avoid falling into Jiang Tiany's trap. Jiang Tiany explained patiently, "Tonight, in the Gold Laurel Palace, the winner will be decided by 2 out of 3 wins. All 3 of us can participate in the competition. Similarly, you and that old man can also participate." Chen Lan frowned again and sank into deep thought. 2 out of 3 wins? If that's the case, one person is indeed not enough. It's almost impossible to forge 3 weapons in a short amount of time. That kid Jiang Tianxing is too weak. Even if he participates in the competition, he will lose without a doubt and can be ignored. It seems that Jiang Tiany and that white-robed youth will be the ones to compete. Thinking of this, Chen Lan stared closely at Ji Tianxing and muttered to himself, "This kid looks ordinary and doesn't look like a divine craftsman. What is Jiang Tiany doing?" At this moment, the white-haired elder reminded him, "Young Master Lan, that kid is human and very unfamiliar. He doesn't look like a Jiang clan disciple." Chen Lan's eyes lit up. He pointed at Ji Tianxing and shouted at Jiang Tiany, "Jiang Tiany, who is that kid? How come I don't know that the Jiang clan has such a person? This is a matter between our sect and the Jiang clan. Why are you asking an outsider for help?" Jiang Tiany was prepared. Without waiting for Ji Tianxing to reply, he took the initiative to answer, "This young Master Tianxing joined the Jiang clan 1,000 years ago. He just hasn't shown himself. I can swear to the heavens that he is definitely a Jiang clan disciple." Jiang Tiany thought to himself, "Young Master Tianxing is our clan's benefactor and the master of second uncle and third uncle. He should be considered a Jiang clan disciple, right?" Chen Lan couldn't refute this. He looked at Ji Tianxing a few more times but couldn't find any clues. He could only nod and agree. "All right, then we'll follow this rule." Jiang Tiany raised his hand and said, "Wait. We still have to summon the 2 blacksmithing geniuses and let them watch the competition with their own eyes. Only in this way will they know what choice they should make." "All right." Chen Lan had the same idea, so she nodded and agreed without any hesitation. Then, Chen Lan and Jiang Tianxing took out jade slips and sent messages to Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang. Everyone waited for a few minutes before the 2 blacksmithing geniuses arrived one after another. Lin Zhen was dressed luxuriously and had greasy hair and a powdered face. He was the standard young master of an aristocratic family. Zhan Longxiang had a rough appearance and was dressed simply. He even wore the Taoist robes of Changeldao College and a square crown on his head. His eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. After the 2 blacksmithing geniuses arrived, Chen Lan explained the situation to them and the meaning of the competition. Lin Zhen smiled and was full of anticipation, waiting to watch a good show. Zhan Longxiang was expressionless and said in a low voice, "Even if the 2 divine blacksmiths decide the winner, Lin Zhen and I will not join the same sect." Chen Lan was a little embarrassed and hurriedly explained, "It's okay. This competition is only to decide who will withdraw." Actually, he hated Zhan Longxiang. This fellow looked rough and had a very old-fashioned and dull personality. He was not as smart as Lin Zhen and was more likable. Chapter 3472. The rules had been set. Those who were supposed to be there had arrived. Hence, Chen Lan asked Uncle Yen to close the doors of the Gold Kasha Palace. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Chen Lan waved his hand and shot out hundreds of divine lights into the ground. In an instant, several divine arrays were activated and enveloped the entire palace. In this way, no one would be disturbed while refining weapons in the palace. The first round would be between Jiang Tiany and Chen Lan. Uncle Yen instructed Chen Lan. Chen Lan nodded to indicate that she understood. Only then did she step into the hall. Jiang Tiany took a deep breath and calmed himself down before walking to the center of the palace. Jiang Tianxing quickly cheered him on and waved his fist. "Seventh brother, I believe you can do it." Jiang Tiany turned around and smiled at him. Then, he looked at Ji Tianqing. Actually, what he cared about the most was Ji Tianqing's attitude. Unfortunately, Ji Tianqing looked indifferent, as if he didn't take it to heart. Jiang Tianyi was a little depressed. He could only turn around and walk to the center of the palace. He and Qianlan sat cross-legged 1,000 feet apart, one on the left and one on the right. In the first round, let's see who can refine a low-grade king-grade divine artifact faster. How about it? Qianlan was the first to speak as he stared at Jiang Tianyi. His strength was similar to Jiang Tianyi's at the 6th level of the Divine King realm. However, he had cultivated for a long time and had reached the peak of the 6th level. He had refined at least 80 king-grade low-grade divine artifacts, if not 100. He was confident that he could beat Jiang Tianyi. Of course, Jiang Tianyi couldn't show his fear. He nodded without hesitation. All right. Then, the first round began. Both of them took out their cauldrons as fast as they could. Jiang Tianyi's bronze cauldron and Qianlan's cauldron were both mid-grade king-grade artifacts. Both of them were outstanding middle-grade divine blacksmith. The moment they took out their cauldrons, they immediately entered a state of full concentration. An invisible aura emanated from their bodies. Both of them forgot about their surroundings and immersed themselves in refining weapons. First, he cast the spell and activated the array formation in the cauldron. Once the divine flames in the cauldron rose and the temperature was suitable, he added the refining materials. Their movements were extremely orderly, extremely skilled, precise, and without the slightest hesitation. Even the materials used by the two of them were the same, 9 sets. Furthermore, the divine weapons they were going to refine were the same. They were both divine swords. There was no other way. Most of the king-grade divine artifacts they refined were weapons. Among the weapons, swords were the most common. Seeing the chemistry between Qianlan and Jiang Tianyi, as well as their skill and speed in smithing, the crowd's interest was piqued. Uncle Yen stood in the upper left corner of the hall, his eyes fixed on Qianlan. Ji Tianqing and Jiang Tianqing sat on the right side of the hall. Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang sat near the entrance of the main hall, separated by a few hundred feet. Even though they didn't get along. But at this moment both of them had neglected each other. They all stared at Qianlan and Jiang Tianyi with rapt attention. They carefully watched the artifact forging, afraid that they would miss any detail. The main hall was silent, and the atmosphere was solemn. But Ji Tianqing's reaction was calm. He didn't pay attention to the two divine blacksmiths and wasn't as nervous as Jiang Tianqing. No one knew. Actually, he already had an answer in his heart and predicted the outcome. Time passed very quickly. Unknowingly, 20 hours had passed in the main hall. At this time, it was just midnight outside the main hall. Only 4 hours had passed. Without a doubt, the divine formation that enveloped the main hall had a time array formation that sped up time by 5 times. Ji Tianqing noticed this and felt slightly comforted. Fortunately, there's time acceleration. Otherwise, waiting for so long would be too boring. As for Uncle Yen, Jiang Tianqing, Lin Zhen, and Zhan Longxiang, they couldn't feel the passage of time at all. All their attention was on Jiang Tianyi and Qianlan, and their hearts were in their throat. At this time, Qianlan and Jiang Tianyi had finished forging the sword embryos and were beginning to inscribe the laws and restriction runes on them. From the looks of it, the two of them were equally matched in terms of speed. But the most crucial moment had arrived. The speed, accuracy, and success rate of inscribing laws and restriction runes were the criteria that determined a divine blacksmith's skill. Jiang Tianqing and Uncle Yan's expressions became even more solemn. Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang were even more engrossed as they analyzed and guessed in their hearts. These two divine blacksmiths seem to be equally skilled. I wonder who will win? Currently, it seems that the divine blacksmith of the Jiang clan has a more stable and reserved personality. He should be easier to get along with. If I enter the Jiang clan, he should take care of me, right? Although divine blacksmith Chun Lan of the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect is arrogant and arrogant, he's the easiest to serve. I only need to put in some effort to win his favor. Hopefully, divine blacksmith Chun Lan will win. Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang each had their own thoughts. Unknowingly, another 6 days passed. Chun Lan and Jiang Tianyi's forging was nearing the end. Their swords were layered with more than 90 laws and restrictions, and more than 900 types of laws and restrictions. Only now did the gap between their forging speed widen slightly. When Chun Lan finished inscribing the 97th law rune, Jiang Tianyi had only finished the 96th law rune and was still inscribing restrictions and restrictions. Such a small difference naturally couldn't escape the eyes of Ji Tianxing, Jiang Tianxing, and Uncle Yen. Ji Tianxing's expression was still calm. Jiang Tianxing's expression became more solemn and anxious. Uncle Yen, on the other hand, heaved a sigh of relief and had a gratified smile on his face. As long as there were no accidents, the outcome was set. However, Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang couldn't see what was going on inside the cauldron and didn't know the difference between the two divine blacksmiths. An hour passed, 2 hours passed. Finally, another hour and a half passed. Chun Lan had successfully inscribed 100 laws and 1,000 restrictions. He was the first to complete the low-grade king-grade divine sword. Phew! Chun Lan stopped and let out a long breath. He used his sleeve to wipe away the sweat on his forehead. He raised his head and looked at Jiang Tianyi. Seeing that Jiang Tianyi wasn't done yet, he smiled smugly. Ha 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 ha! Jiang Tianyi, oh Jiang Tianyi, I thought you were very capable. I didn't expect you to be so arrogant with just this little bit of skill. Chun Lan laughed smugly and mocked Jiang Tianyi mercilessly. Jiang Tianyi was already very anxious, and when he heard Chun Lan's cold laughter, he became even more anxious and his expression turned ugly. However, he wasn't distracted by Chun Lan. He pursed his lips and continued with the finishing touches. Although he had already lost, he couldn't give up halfway. He still had to complete the forging. Moreover, he still had a glimmer of hope. Perhaps the divine sword he forged would be more successful and perfect than Chun Lan's? Jiang Tianxing was also dejected. His eyes were filled with disappointment as he muttered to himself, "How can this be? Seventh brother's skill in forging is in the top 3 among us 9 brothers." Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3473. Jiang Tianxing could not accept this result. He even thought that losing to Chun Lan meant that he could only withdraw from the competition for the blacksmithing genius. "I can't accept this. I was the one who found these 2 blacksmithing geniuses first." Jiang Tianxing roared in his heart. He clenched his fists so tightly that the veins on the back of his hands popped out. On the other side, Uncle Yen puffed out his chest with a proud smile on his face. Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang had different expressions. Zhan Longxiang frowned, clearly surprised and disappointed. However, Lin Zhen raised his brows, his eyes filled with anticipation and joy. Chun Lan was not in a hurry to open the cauldron lid. He continued to mock Jiang Tianyi and harassed him with words to buy time. Fortunately, Jiang Tianyi had strong willpower and turned a deaf ear to his words. After another quarter of an hour, Jiang Tianyi finally completed the forging of the divine sword. When he stopped, Chun Lan sneered contemptuously, "You've already lost and you're still putting on airs?" Jiang Tianyi said expressionlessly, "As a blacksmith and a divine blacksmith, the most basic requirement is to never give up on a piece of work easily. This is a form of respect for the materials and oneself. A loss is a loss. Why are you still so stubborn?" Chun Lan pursed his lips in disdain and sneered. "You were 15 minutes slower than me. That's enough to see the difference in strength." Jiang Tianyi did not bicker with him. He said coldly, "You can't make a conclusion without seeing the divine sword." "All right, I'll make you give up then." Chun Lan smiled disdainfully and opened the cauldron lid. Swoosh! A golden arc flew out of the cauldron and lit up with a dazzling golden light. It was like the sun hanging in the sky, illuminating the entire hall. Everyone's eyes were focused on the golden ark. They saw a golden divine sword about 3 feet long and 2 inches wide floating in the air. The sword was dignified and holy. It looked like a swimming dragon, and the sword light was dense and hazy. It was definitely the best among the low-grade king-level divine weapons. Uncle Yen was the first to clap and cheer. Young Master Lan is extremely talented and his blacksmithing skills have reached perfection. This sword is of the best quality. Lin Zhen also cheered and said excitedly, "Good sword. What a peerless sword." Although the battle-dragonesque elephant did not say anything, its eyes were burning. It was obvious that it approved and was excited. Chun Lan laughed heartily. "Ha ha ha ha! Jiang Tianyi, did you see that clearly? Learn from him. However, I feel that you won't be able to learn it at all." Jiang Tianxing curled his lips angrily and said, "What are you so proud of? 7th Brother's divine weapon hasn't shown up yet." As his voice fell, Jiang Tianyi waved his hand and opened the lid. Swish! A streak of scarlet light soared into the sky, bringing with it a fearful sword radiance. It was like a bloody sun in the sky, illuminating the entire hall red. Within the blood-red light was a broadsword that was about 5 feet long and as wide as a palm. It was emitting a heavy and sacred pressure. This sword wasn't as dignified and divine as Qin Lan's golden sword. It was more like a sword of slaughter that could split the heavens and the earth apart. It was filled with an iron-blooded domineering aura and a might that looked down upon all living beings. If Qin Lan's work was described as a monarch's sword, then Jiang Tianyi's divine sword would be an overlord's sword. Without a doubt, this sword was also a top-grade low-grade king-grade god artifact. Jiang Tianxing was the first to applaud. He shouted, "Did you see that? 7th Brother's divine sword is even more powerful and domineering than yours. Your sword is a woman's sword. 7th Brother's bloody slaughter divine sword is a real man's weapon." Chun Lan's expression didn't look too good as he glared at Jiang Tianxing. Uncle Yen was silent and didn't comment. He was also someone who knew his stuff. Of course, he knew that both swords were top grade. It was hard to tell which was better. Lin Zhen frowned and didn't say anything. He had to admit that the bloody slaughter divine sword was very impressive. On the other hand, Zhan Longxiang's face was filled with excitement and admiration. His face was flushed red. He didn't say anything, but he was screaming in his heart, "What a peerless divine weapon! This is the sword that I've been dreaming of!" The hall fell into a short period of silence. Chun Lan frowned and said, "Jiang Tianyi, everyone's eyes are clear. I'll be fair and objective and say that the bloody slaughter divine sword you refined is also a top-grade weapon. In terms of divine sword quality, you and I are tied. However, you were 15 minutes slower than me. That's the truth. Therefore, you still lost." Jiang Tianyi couldn't refute and could only silently put away the bloody slaughter divine sword and divine furnace. But Jiang Tianxing was very unconvinced. He still wanted to quibble but didn't know what to say. The first round ended just like that. Chun Lan looked askance at Jiang Tianyi and said with a cold smile, "How is it? You're not convinced of your loss, right? Want another round? Anyway, it's decided in 3 rounds. You still have 2 chances." Chun Lan was very cunning. Although he had just refined an artifact and used up a lot of divine power, if they continued to compete, his speed would definitely decrease several times. However, Jiang Tianyi was the same as him. His strength and foundation were inferior to his, and his speed would be even slower. If they continued to compete in the second round, Jiang Tianyi would still lose to him. And he would lose even more miserably. Best of 3. If Jiang Tianyi lost 2 rounds in a row, he could scram with his tail between his legs. Everyone present understood Qin Lan's intentions. Jiang Tianyi naturally wasn't willing to take the bait. He said with a cold smile, "You'd better save it. Also, best of 3. You've only won 1 round. Don't be smug too early. Then, he ignored Chen Lan's mockery and walked toward Jiang Tianxing and Ji Tianxing. Everyone thought that he would meditate for a while before competing with Chen Lan. However, to everyone's surprise, he walked straight to Ji Tianxing and bowed respectfully with a sincere expression. Young Master Tianxing, I can only rely on you. Jiang Tianyi bowed very low with a sincere expression. Chen Lan, Uncle Yen, Lin Zhen, and Zhan Longxiang all looked at Ji Tianxing. Jiang Tianxing was also surprised. He pulled Jiang Tianyi's sleeve and asked, "Seventh brother, you're not going to compete? You're letting him compete in your place? Can he do it?" Jiang Tianyi ignored him and maintained his bow. Ji Tianxing frowned slightly. He looked at Jiang Tianyi and asked, "Are you sure you want me to compete? Are you not going to compete?" Jiang Tianyi replied in a low and depressed tone, "I'm indeed not his match. After all, I'm 3,000 years younger than him and my cultivation is not as profound as his. Now, only you can secure the victory and force Chen Lan to withdraw. Otherwise, the two blacksmithing geniuses will be taken away by the 100 smelting ancient sect. The Jiang clan will lose face." Ji Tianxing was silent for a moment, then nodded and said, "All right, I'll help you one more time for your sake. Get up." Jiang Tianyi stood up with a gratified smile. He said solemnly, "Thank you for your help, young master. I will never forget it." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and didn't say anything. He stood up and walked to the center of the hall. At this moment, Chen Lan frowned and asked coldly, "Kid, who are you?" Uncle Yen also said expressionlessly, "An outsider has no right to interfere with the battle between our sect and the Jiang clan. Young man, if you don't reveal your identity, don't blame me for throwing you out of the Gold Laurel Palace." Chapter 3474. Previously, Chen Lan and Uncle Yen had suspected Ji Tianxing's identity. However, he kept a low profile and did not attract any attention. Hence, the two of them did not pay much attention to him. However, it was different now. Jiang Tianyi had lost the first round, but he wanted to invite Ji Tianxing to participate in the second round. Moreover, Jiang Tianyi was very respectful towards Ji Tianxing, as if he was facing an elder. However, there was no such young human among the elders, protectors, and leaders of the Jiang clan. How could Chen Lan and Uncle Yen not be suspicious? Faced with the two's questioning, Jiang Tianyi frowned and hesitated whether to reveal Ji Tianxing's true identity. At this moment, Ji Tianxing looked at Uncle Yen with a smile and mocked, "Yen Shangao, it's been 1,000 years and you haven't improved at all. Oh right, is your illegitimate son still alive? Don't tell me you've decided to kill him for justice?" He paused for a while and muttered to himself, "However, with your character, you'll probably kill your illegitimate son to protect yourself. After all, your wife is a direct descendant of the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect. If you want to hug the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect's thigh, you have to show your determination." Upon hearing this, Uncle Yen, who was still domineering just a moment ago, froze. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. His expression was extremely ugly. His eyes were wide open as he stared fixedly at Ji Tianxing. His eyes were filled with fear. "You! Who are you? Don't slander me and tarnish my reputation." Uncle Yen was shocked, but he still maintained his rationality and quickly denied it. However, his reaction had already betrayed him. Everyone knew that Ji Tianxing was right. Even Chen Lan was stunned. She looked at Uncle Yen with a strange look in her eyes. Seeing Chen Lan's reaction, Ji Tianxing ignored Uncle Yen and said to Chen Lan, "Second brother Chen, it seems like you don't know Yen Shangao well. This old man used to be the guard commander of the treasury and was a person of high status. However, 1,000 years ago, the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect suddenly announced that he would be stripped of his position and demoted to your housekeeper and guard. Don't you understand what's going on? Maybe you're still feeling complacent and think that the sect thinks highly of you, so you did it on purpose, right?" Chen Lan was at a loss for words. She wanted to retort, but she couldn't. Uncle Yan's expression turned even uglier. His eyes were as sharp as swords as he glared at Ji Tianqing. In a low voice, he asked, "Boy, who are you?" Ji Tianqing smiled contemptuously and said in an indifferent tone, "Yan Shangao, not to mention you, even if your sect leader Su Bailian was here, he wouldn't dare to be impudent in front of this king. There are 800 outer disciples, 200 inner disciples, 9 elite disciples, 12 elders, the left and right protectors, the sect leader and the vice-sect leader. I know all of them like the back of my hand. Can you guess who this prince is? In terms of seniority, both of you should address this prince as Old Master." Chun Lan and Uncle Yen were dumbfounded. They stared at him with their mouths agape. Their first reaction was disbelief. Not only was this human young man young, but he was also a nobody. How could he have such a high seniority? Chun Lan and Uncle Yen were furious. They felt that the other party was bluffing and even humiliating them. However, both of them suppressed their anger and didn't dare to be impudent. After all, Ji Tianqing's tone was calm and confident. It was as if he was telling the truth. He wasn't pretending. Moreover, he knew the situation of the 100 Refinement Ancient sect very well. His words were clear and logical. He even dared to call the sect leader of the 100 Refinement Ancient sect by his name. In an instant, Chun Lan and Uncle Yen were stunned. They couldn't tell if it was true or false. The two of them looked at each other and discussed secretly through voice transmission. "Uncle Yen, can you guess who this boy is? Is there such a human young man among the seniors who have dealings with our sect?" "Chun Lan, don't be fooled by him. This boy is so young. How can he be a senior?" "Uncle Yen, to us divine king powerhouses, maintaining a youthful appearance isn't anything difficult. Moreover, there are many old monsters who have lived for tens of thousands of years who like to disguise themselves as handsome young men. This guy doesn't look like he's lying. If he really is a senior, won't we offend him?" Chun Lan was obviously stunned and didn't dare to act rashly. However, Uncle Yen shook his head secretly and objected. "I feel that the probability of this is not high. What if he's pretending and we're still fooled? Won't that be embarrassing?" Chun Lan frowned and said in a low voice, "Uncle Yen, he knows the situation of our sect like the back of his hand. Also, what he said about you just now, is it true?" Uncle Yan's expression was very awkward. He turned his head and said, "Young Master Lan, can we not talk about this?" Chun Lan spread out his hands and said, "Then it's true? Since that's the case, we'd rather believe it's true than not. Anyway, we're only competing with him in weapon refinement. We won't fight to the death. No matter if he's real or fake, we won't lose anything if we don't harp on this question." Uncle Yen remained silent, which was a tacit agreement. At this time, Ji Tianqing looked at Chun Lan with a smile that didn't look like a smile. He asked, "Are the two of you done muttering? Who still has objections to my identity?" Uncle Yen remained silent and glared at him angrily. Chun Lan wanted to ask who Ji Tianqing was, but Ji Tianqing's words made his body tense up and his hair stand on end. 1,125 years ago, 3 disciples of the 100 Refinement Ancient sect entered the mysterious nether cave to explore. You were one of them, right? 2 of them died, and only you came out alive. Have you found out the cause of their deaths? Although Ji Tianqing seemed to be asking casually, a cold smile appeared on his face. However, there was a cold smile on his lips as he stared at Chun Lan with a meaningful look in his eyes. That deep and cold gaze seemed to be able to see through people's hearts. Chun Lan's heart clenched and cold sweat broke out on his back. Even his expression was a little stiff. Others didn't know the truth, but he was well aware. He was the one who caused the death of one of the disciples. In order to cover up the truth, he killed the other disciple. After escaping the mysterious nether cave, he lied that the 2 disciples were attacked by ferocious beasts and that he had risked his life to escape. The 100 Refinement Ancient sect investigated for a period of time, but nothing was found. Everyone had forgotten about this matter, and Chen Lan had also thrown it to the back of his mind. Now that Ji Tianqing mentioned it, it seemed like he was reminding him of something. Chen Lan immediately became vigilant and fearful. He was afraid that he would expose himself, so he quickly smiled and said, "Young Master Tianqing, you must be joking. The sect has already investigated this matter." Ji Tianqing didn't pursue the matter. He smiled and said, "Can we start the second round now?" Chen Lan secretly sighed in relief and quickly nodded. "Yes, of course." Ji Tianqing looked at him from the corner of his eyes and sneered. "You seem to be very guilty. Could it be that paper can't wrap fire and you've exposed yourself?" Chen Lan's nerves, which had just relaxed, instantly tensed up again. Her heart thumped. When he saw Uncle Yan's doubtful and scrutinizing gaze, his mind went blank. He stopped breathing and his limbs turned cold. Chapter 3475. At that moment, Chen Lan was truly scared out of his wits. The rules of the 100 Refinements ancient sect were very strict. Once the sect found out that he had harmed a fellow disciple, only death awaited him. Furthermore, the disciples of the sect could expose each other. For example, if Uncle Yen exposed this matter to the sect, he would be rewarded greatly. Perhaps his punishment would be revoked, and he would be able to return to guard the treasury and be the leader of the guards. That was why Chen Lan was so terrified. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing waved his hand and smiled. "I was just joking with you. Look at how scared you are." Only then did Chen Lan feel as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Her suspended heart finally settled back into her stomach, and her soul that had flown out of the heavens returned to her body. He forced an ugly smile on his pale face and said in a hoarse voice, "Young Master Tianqing, you can't joke about this. It'll kill someone." Uncle Yen retracted his suspicious gaze and remained silent. Ji Tianqing sat down cross-legged and took out the 9 heavens cauldron. "All right, let's not waste any more time. Let's start the competition. Which one of you will fight?" Chen Lan secretly wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and pointed at Uncle Yen. "He will fight. I need to rest for a few days. He will fight this round." Uncle Yen was prepared for this, so he wasn't surprised. However, he frowned and looked at Chen Lan. "Young Master Lan, I'm not a direct disciple of the sect. My skills in refining weapons are very ordinary. I can't compare to you. This guy's background is mysterious, so his skills must be extraordinary. His skills in refining weapons must be superb. If I fight him, I'll most likely lose." Chen Lan didn't panic and replied calmly, "Uncle Yen, don't worry. This is just a temporary measure. Don't forget, we'll win 2 out of 3 rounds. I've already won 1 round, so it's fine even if you lose to him. In the 3rd round, it'll still be me versus Jiang Tianyi. They'll definitely lose." Uncle Yen was stunned for a moment before he reacted. He nodded in agreement. "That's right. This guy needs to rest after the competition. Jiang Tianyi will fight the 3rd round." Thinking of this, he calmed down and no longer felt pressured. "All right, I'll fight you in the 2nd round." Uncle Yen regained his dignified aura and walked to the center of the hall. He was 100 meters away from Ji Tianqing. He took out a king-level divine cauldron and sat cross-legged on the ground. "Young Master Tianqing, you think too highly of yourself. You even consider yourself our senior. Then this old man would like to see if your attainments and strength in refining artifacts are as big as your words." Ji Tianqing looked at him with a smile and said lightly, "You're just cannon fodder. Don't give yourself more drama." Uncle Yan's face turned red, but he couldn't say a single word of rebuttal. Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianqing both held their stomachs and laughed out loud. Even Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang smiled. The atmosphere in the main hall was finally not so oppressive anymore. Soon, the competition between Ji Tianqing and Uncle Yen began. The two of them activated the array formation in the divine cauldron and began to adjust the divine flames and the temperature in the cauldron to prepare for the refinement. An hour later, the preparations were complete. The two of them took out the materials and added them into the cauldron. The competition was still about refining a king-level low-grade divine artifact. Uncle Yen took out 10 sets of materials to refine a divine sword. Ji Tianxing took out 8 sets of materials to refine a divine armor. Chun Lan, Jiang Tianxing, and the others were shocked when they saw the materials used by the two of them. They were filled with doubt. That's a king-level low-grade divine artifact. He needs at least 9 sets of materials to succeed. He only used 8 sets? Even Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang looked at Ji Tianxing in a different light. They were looking forward to it. He wants to refine a king-level divine artifact with only 8 sets of materials? It seems like this Tianxing has a special refining technique that's better than Chun Lan and Jiang Tianyi's. Out of everyone present, only Jiang Tianyi had a smile on his face. He was already used to it. After that, Ji Tianxing and Uncle Yen both focused on casting their spells and forging tools. Uncle Yen gave it his all. He was especially serious and focused. His nerves were tense. Although he was cannon fodder, Chun Lan expected him to lose. But he wanted to prove himself and give it his all. If he beat Ji Tianxing, not only would he be proud, but he would also win the competition and force the Jiang clan out of the competition. Then he would have made a contribution. On the other hand, Ji Tianxing's expression was calm and indifferent. There was a sense of leisure in his concentration. It was as if he wasn't refining artifacts, completing a mission, or competing with others. It was as if he was drinking tea, admiring the moon, and appreciating paintings. His mental state was relaxed. But his hand movements were as smooth as flowing water. It was too fast for the eyes to take in, and it was accurate. He used different methods in the early, middle, and late stages of refining the divine armor. They were all refining techniques that no one had ever heard of before. They were mysterious and profound. Chun Lan, Jiang Tianyi, Jiang Tianxing, Lin Zhen, and Zhan Longxiang stared at him. Their eyes were filled with amazement and admiration, especially Zhan Longxiang. His eyes were burning, and his heart was filled with adoration. Time passed quickly, and no one noticed. Unknowingly, 7 days had passed. Ji Tianxing finally finished his refinement and stopped his work. His expression was still calm, and there wasn't even a bead of sweat on his forehead. He looked especially relaxed. After he finished refining, he didn't say anything. He just sat on the spot and closed his eyes, waiting silently. The 9th heaven cauldron that was spinning quickly also stopped. It floated motionlessly. Seeing him do that, Jiang Tianyi, Jiang Tianxing, Lin Zhen, and Zhan Longxiang all looked at Chun Lan. Chun Lan was embarrassed. He was too ashamed to show his face. After all, he was very proud of himself after refining the artifact. He even mocked and harassed Jiang Tianyi. Compared to Ji Tianxing's actions, he was a despicable person. Ji Tianxing had the demeanor of a grandmaster and the bearing of a divine blacksmith. Embarrassed by everyone's gazes, Chun Lan could only change the topic. He pursed his lips and said, "So what if his refining techniques are fancy? Didn't he use 7 days just like me? Even if he were to compete with me, we would only be able to tie." No one said anything. They couldn't refute him. After that, the crowd waited for another 12 hours before Uncle Yen finally completed the refinement. Phew! After he stopped, Uncle Yen let out a sigh of relief. He wiped the sweat off his forehead with his sleeve. His face was a little pale, and he looked a little tired. He said to Chun Lan, "Young Master Lan, I didn't let you down. I've finished refining." Chun Lan forced a smile. "Uncle Yen, you've worked hard. However, young Master Tianxing finished refining 12 hours ago." Uncle Yen was stunned. He said dejectedly, "I didn't expect that I would still lose after giving it my all." Chun Lan hurriedly comforted him. "Don't worry. Let's wait until everyone sees your work. Perhaps your artifact will be more exquisite than his?" Uncle Yen nodded and opened the cauldron lid. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3476. Swoosh. The lid of the cauldron opened, and a white rainbow flew into the air. A 4-foot-long sword was wrapped in the dazzling white rainbow. The sword was blazing white and had a dignified appearance. It rippled with a vigorous divine power aura. It contained 100 types of divine Tao laws and 1,000 types of divine formations and restrictions. Compared to Chun Lan and Jiang Tianyi's works, this sword could only be considered average and not outstanding. Chun Lan was a little disappointed. He had already guessed the outcome. However, he still had a trace of hope and hope. He looked at Ji Tianxing and said, "Young Master Tianxing, it's your turn." Ji Tianxing did not waste any time. He waved his hand and opened the lid of the 9 heavens cauldron. Swoosh! A dazzling icy blue divine light bloomed from the cauldron and slowly rose into the air. The entire hall was illuminated with an icy blue color. It was like a palace of ice and snow. Following the appearance of an exquisite and gorgeous divine armor, the entire hall turned into a hall of extreme cold. Frost formed everywhere. Everyone ignored the bone-piercing cold. They stared at the icy blue armor and observed it carefully. This divine armor is too beautiful. This should be for a woman to wear, right? Jiang Tianxing exclaimed from the bottom of his heart. It's so exquisite and gorgeous. The patterns on the armor are also original. It's really admirable. Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang were excited. Their expressions were filled with admiration and worship. Even Chun Lan had to admit that this divine armor was indeed a divine item. It was a 1-in-1,000 masterpiece. Jiang Tianyi observed it carefully for a while before saying, "It's really a low-grade king-grade divine artifact. And it's a supreme grade 1. Whether it's the difficulty of refining or the quality, it far surpasses the bloody slaughter sword that I refined and the sword that Chun Lan refined." Jiang Tianyi was sincerely impressed. However, before he could finish, Chun Lan said indignantly, "I don't deny that it surpasses your bloody slaughter sword. However, it surpasses my divine sword? Are you sure?" Jiang Tianyi turned to look at him and nodded expressionlessly. "I'm very sure. First of all, refining an armor is more complicated and time-consuming than a divine sword. Secondly, young Master Tianxing only used 8 sets of materials. You used 9 sets. This is enough to prove that young Master Tianxing's attainments in refining artifacts are superior to yours. Most importantly, take a closer look at this divine armor. How many laws and restrictions does it contain?" Chun Lan was stunned. She looked at the ice-blue divine armor again and observed it carefully. After a short moment, his figure shook while his expression stiffened, and he couldn't help but exclaim with shock. 130 divine crests of the laws? More than 1,300 restrictions? Oh my God! It's only been 7 days, how could he? Chun Lan was completely dumbfounded. He was so shocked that his blood was boiling and his entire body was burning. At this moment, winning or losing was no longer important. He just wanted to know how Ji Tianxing did it. Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang were also stunned. They looked at Ji Tianxing with eyes full of respect and admiration. The hall fell into silence. Uncle Yen put away the divine cauldron and divine sword. He broke the silence and said in a low voice, "We have lost the second round." His words woke everyone up. Only then did Chun Lan come back to his senses. He regained his confidence and composure and grinned. "Haha, even if young Master Tianxing won, it's nothing. It's all within my expectations anyway. Now that we are tied, we have to wait for the 3rd round to determine the winner." With that said, Chun Lan looked at Jiang Tianyi provocatively and curled his finger. "Jiang Tianyi, my divine power and condition have both recovered to their peak. You can admit defeat in advance." Jiang Tianyi immediately frowned, and his expression became serious. "That's right. So what if Ji Tianxing won the 1st round? He still had to go up for the 3rd round and have a final battle with Chun Lan. He had only recovered 90% and was not at his peak condition. It was very, very difficult to win against Chunlan. Jiang Tianyi was originally very happy, but when he thought of this problem, he became depressed. Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang also looked at Jiang Tianyi, waiting for him to make a decision. Should he compete with Chunlan and lose? Or should he save his energy and time and admit defeat directly? Just as everyone was waiting for Jiang Tianyi to make a decision, a calm voice sounded. The third round will still be mine. Everyone was stunned for a moment and turned their heads. Without a doubt, the person who spoke was Ji Tianxing. Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianyi both frowned and asked worriedly, "Young Master Tianxing, aren't you going to rest for a few days?" Although the two of them said the same thing, their thoughts were different. Jiang Tianyi was worried that Ji Tianxing's continuous forging of divine weapons would damage his foundation of the divine path. Jiang Tianyi, on the other hand, was worried that Ji Tianxing would lose to Chunlan due to his lack of strength in the third round. Chunlan raised his eyebrows and asked with a playful smile, "Young Master Tianxing, your forging skills are indeed extraordinary. However, you have just finished forging a divine weapon. Are you sure you want to continue? Don't say that I took advantage of you by not letting you rest and recuperate. You asked for it yourself." Clearly, Chunlan was not worried about losing at all. If Jiang Tianyi participated in the third round, he would definitely lose. If Ji Tianxing continued, he would not have much chance of winning in a situation where he did not have enough divine power and was mentally exhausted. No matter what, Chunlan was sure to win. Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said indifferently, "It's only been 7 days. I didn't use much divine power. Do I still need to rest and recuperate?" Chunlan choked on her words and said in exasperation, "Fine. Since you are so confident, let's wait and see." Jiang Tianyi wanted to persuade Ji Tianxing but was stopped by Jiang Tianyi. He transmitted his voice to Jiang Tianyi, "Ninth brother, young Master Tianxing's strength and methods are far beyond our imagination. Since he is so confident, we will definitely win." Jiang Tianyi was skeptical. After hesitating for a long time, he finally acquiesced. On the other side, Uncle Yen reminded Chunlan, "Young Master Lan, that kid's forging skills are so shocking. You must not let your guard down." Chunlan nodded to show that he understood and said with a smile, "If I had competed with him just now, I would definitely have lost. His forging skills are indeed brilliant. However, he has just finished forging a divine weapon. His divine power must be empty and his mind exhausted. I, on the other hand, am in peak condition. Why should I be afraid of losing to him?" Uncle Yen was speechless. He could only remind him, "In any case, young Master Lan, you must give it your all." "All right, I understand." Chunlan waved his hand and walked to the main hall to sit down. He took out the divine cauldron and looked at Ji Tianxing opposite him. "Shall we begin?" Ji Tianxing raised his hand and said, "Wait. This third round will determine the winner. If we compete like this, it will be too monotonous." Chunlan frowned. "What? You know that your divine power is insufficient and want to change the rules?" Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "It's boring to just forge a low-grade king-level divine weapon. Why don't we upgrade the divine weapon we just forged to mid-grade?" "Upgrade a low-grade divine weapon?" Chunlan frowned and pondered seriously. After weighing the pros and cons, he gritted his teeth and made a decision. "Fine." Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "Why don't we add some stakes? Otherwise, it will be boring for everyone to watch." Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3477. Ji Tianxing's words made Chunlan fall silent. Uncle Yen was filled with anxiety. He hurriedly sent a voice transmission to remind him. "Young Master Lan, be careful of that guy's tricks. Both are low-grade king-grade divine artifacts, but the divine armor he made has 30 more runes than your divine sword. If the two of you compete like this, he can save nearly a day of time compared to you. Moreover, you haven't made many mid-grade king-grade divine artifacts. I'm afraid you don't have enough experience. Before Uncle Yen could finish, Chen Lan waved his hand and interrupted him. Uncle Yen, not only have I helped my master and a few elders to make mid-grade king-grade divine artifacts 7 times, but I've also made them 3 times. And all of them were successful. If we're talking about experience, I'm quite confident. However, his divine armor has 130 runes, so it can save a lot of time. Seeing that he had listened to his advice, Uncle Yen didn't say anything else. Chen Lan looked at Ji Tianxing and asked, "What do you want to bet with me?" Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "Of course I want to bet some valuables, such as precious treasures or divine artifacts. Do you dare?" Chen Lan sneered and said, "Why wouldn't I dare? Tell me, what treasures do you want to bet?" Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "Your master is the left protector of the 100 Refinements ancient sect. I remember that he found a great opportunity on a star when he was exploring the universe. He dug up a huge piece of primordial jade essence, which is a treasure that has been growing for 100,000 years. Not only can it be used to heal injuries, forge weapons and refine pills, but it can also be refined to increase one's strength. He seems to have divided the primordial jade essence into a few portions. He gave one to the 100 Refinements ancient sect, refined one for himself, and kept a few for himself. If I'm not wrong, you're the disciple he's most proud of, so he should have given you a portion, right?" Hearing this, Chen Lan was instantly on guard, and his eyes were filled with caution. "How do you know all this? You're actually thinking about Master's primordial jade essence?" Chen Lan exclaimed. This matter was extremely secretive. Even within the 100 Refinements ancient sect, not many people knew about it. 200 years ago, Chen Lan had made a great contribution and brought glory to his master. That was why his master had secretly rewarded him with a primordial jade marrow. From then on, he learned of the origin and effects of the primordial chalcedony. It grew in the depths of the earth's core. Even though it was nurtured within a divine jade mine, it was like fine nectar that could be directly consumed and refined. After obtaining the primordial chalcedony, Chen Lan had wanted to refine it to increase her cultivation. However, the left protector had repeatedly warned him that he had to wait until he reached the peak of the 6th degree realm and break through the shackles of the high-level divine king before using it. This way, he would have even greater hopes of becoming a high divine king. That was why Chen Lan had kept the primordial jade quintessence all this while and had not refined it yet. However, he did not expect that Ji Tianxing would actually guess that he had this item and even wanted to use it as a wager. Without any hesitation, Chen Lan rejected him decisively. "No. I will never use it as a wager. Don't even think about it." With regards to his reaction, Ji Tianxing was not surprised at all. He merely smiled and said, "Why? The competition hasn't even started and you already think that you will lose? If that's the case, you might as well admit defeat and leave Changle City." "How can I admit defeat?" Of course, Chen Lan was not convinced, but he would not be provoked. "However, I will not use the primordial chalcedony as a wager. You can give up now." "Haha, is that so?" Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said in a playful tone, "Since you want to bet, of course it has to be fair. My wager is as valuable as the primordial chalcedony. Don't you want to know what it is?" "What else can be as valuable as the primordial chalcedony?" Chen Lan naturally did not believe him. He frowned and stared at Ji Tianxing. Uncle Yen also revealed a curious and doubtful expression as he waited for Ji Tianxing's reply. Ji Tianxing looked at the two of them and said with a playful smile, "The 100 Smelting Ancient Sect was founded more than 37,000 years ago by a peerless divine blacksmith, Lien Qianqiu. At that time, Lien Qianqiu was only obsessed with researching and crafting divine weapons. He did not have time to care about worldly affairs. In order to craft a peerless divine weapon, He spent thousands of years of effort and traveled across the universe. He searched every corner of the divine world and almost died. He was a true blacksmithing maniac and a lunatic for researching divine weapons. Fortunately, he had 4 successful disciples who used his name to create the 100 Smelting Ancient Sect. After 3,000 years of development, the sect occupied a paradise and transcended the worldly affairs. It was with the power of the sect that Lien Qianqiu was able to gather the 2 sets of materials that he desperately needed. In the end, he successfully crafted a king-grade divine weapon, the 100 Smelting Divine Hammer. Uncle Yen and Chunlan were not unfamiliar with the legend of the 100 Smelting Ancient Sect's founding ancestor. However, after listening to Ji Tianqing's story, the 2 of them were not annoyed. Instead, they were filled with pride. However, when they heard the words 100 Smelting Divine Hammer, their expressions turned cold and their eyes dimmed. Ji Tianqing continued, although Lien Qianqiu did not change his ways of being a blacksmith maniac and went to the universe to search for special materials, unfortunately, he died in a black hole. However, the 100 Smelting Divine Hammer is indeed a peerless divine weapon. It has protected the 100 Smelting Ancient Sect for more than 30,000 years. It's a pity that the 100 Smelting Divine Hammer was destroyed during the War of the Gods 1,000 years ago. It turned into dust and scattered in the void. Until now, the 100 Smelting Ancient Sect has not been able to craft a similar divine hammer. This should be the 100 Smelting Ancient Sect's greatest wish, right? Chunlan and Uncle Yen both furrowed their brows and nodded with solemn and serious expressions. You're right. This is indeed our sect's greatest regret. What are you trying to say? Don't tell us that you can craft a 100 Smelting Divine Hammer. That would be a joke. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, although I can craft a 100 Smelting Divine Hammer, I don't have the time to spend thousands of years searching for materials. Uncle Yen and Chunlan could tell that something was amiss. Their expressions changed and their hearts jumped to their throat. What do you mean? You can craft a 100 Smelting Divine Hammer? That's impossible. Ji Tianqing said calmly. If I'm not wrong, the 100 Smelting Ancient Sect has prepared all the materials to craft a divine hammer. Unfortunately, the only thing you lack is the blueprint of the divine hammer. The 100 Smelting Divine Hammer is extremely complicated and exquisite. None of you can see through it and no one can remember it. Naturally, you won't be able to craft it. After saying that, Ji Tianqing circulated his divine force, and a ball of golden light the size of an egg flew out from his forehead. The dense golden light contained a vast amount of information. It was mysterious and profound. Ji Tianqing held the golden light in his hand and looked at Chunlan with a smile. He said, coincidentally, I know the blueprint of the 100 Smelting Divine Hammer. Chunlan, which one is more precious, the blueprint of the 100 Smelting Divine Hammer or your primordial jade essence? Hearing this, Chunlan was so excited that his blood boiled. He stared at the golden light with a burning gaze and could not help but swallow his saliva. Is there a need to ask? Even 10 primordial jade essences cannot compare to the blueprint of the 100 Smelting Divine Hammer. Chapter 3478. Chunlan was exaggerating. However, this was also within reason. To the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect, the primordial jade marrow was just a precious treasure. However, the 100 Refinement Divine Hammer was different. It was the totem of the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect, the divine weapon of the sect. It was the pride and reliance of all the disciples of the 100 Refinement Ancient Sect. Ji Tianqing's words made Chunlan's blood boil. He was filled with excitement and anticipation. He wanted to take out the primordial jade marrow and exchange it for the blueprint of the divine hammer in Ji Tianqing's hands. However, that was impossible. Uncle Yen was also excited, but he was able to maintain his calm. Wait! He suddenly shouted coldly, interrupting Chunlan's fantasy. Young Master Tianqing, No one in the sect knows about the structure of the 100 refinement divine hammer. How could an outsider like you know about it? Also, who can prove that the blueprint in your hands is real? Chun-Lan finally snapped out of his daze. He quickly nodded and asked, "That's right. You can't just take out something and lie to me that it's the blueprint of the 100 refinement divine hammer. You're taking this too lightly." Ji Tianqing smiled and said proudly, "You'll know if it's real or fake when you see it." As he spoke, he waved his right hand and a golden ball of light appeared in front of Chun-Lan. Chun-Lan was stunned. He did not take the golden ball of light. Instead, he asked Ji Tianqing, "If this is really the blueprint of the divine hammer, aren't you afraid that we'll memorize it?" Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "Take a look. If you two can understand it within 3 days, I'll admit defeat. As for memorizing it, don't even think about it. Even if everyone in the 100 refinement ancient sect came to see it, they wouldn't be able to memorize it. The most special thing about the 100 refinement divine hammer is that other than Lien Qianqiu, no one else can memorize its blueprint." Chun-Lan was shocked into a daze, and a deep sense of reverence grew in her heart. Uncle Yen frowned and refuted, "Other than our sect's founder, no one else can memorize the blueprint. How can you memorize it? Doesn't this mean that your blueprint is fake?" Ji Tianqing couldn't help but roll his eyes. "Yen Shigao, with your IQ, it's hard for us to communicate. I didn't memorize this blueprint by memory." This time, Uncle Yen understood. He said, "You mean you have a blueprint of the hammer and you're copying it for us?" Ji Tianqing just smiled and didn't want to bother with him anymore. Chun-Lan could not wait any longer. She extended her trembling hands and held the golden ball of light. She used her divine sense to read the information within. Instantly, his mind was flooded with information that was as deep as the ocean. It was to the extent that his entire body froze on the spot. It was as if he had fallen asleep and almost lost consciousness. After a long time, he finally calmed his mind and no longer dared to read the information in the light ball. Huff, 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 Chun-Lan held the ball of light in her hand as she panted heavily. Her face was somewhat pale. "It's too scary. Who would remember such a vast amount of information? I only saw about 10% of it and my mind almost fainted. It's too scary." Seeing that Chun-Lan couldn't help but exclaim, Uncle Yen looked expectant and eager to try. Jiang Tianyi, Jiang Tianqing, Lin Zhen, Zhan Longxiang, and the others were also very interested. They were all shocked and expectant. They were all grandmasters and divine blacksmiths. They also wanted to see how mysterious and terrifying the blueprint of a peerless divine weapon was. Soon, Uncle Yen took the golden ball of light and immersed himself in it. When he took it, his reaction was even worse than Chun-Lan's. After only 10 breaths, he felt dizzy and lost control of his mind. As if drunk, he stumbled and fell in the main hall. This is unbelievable." He quickly got up from the ground and exclaimed excitedly, "This is no ordinary divine weapon. It must be a peerless divine weapon. Although I only saw less than 10% of it, I dare say that only a top divine blacksmith can create such a divine weapon." At this moment, Uncle Yan's doubts were dispelled. He was completely convinced by the blueprint of the 100 smelting divine hammer. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and took the golden ball of light back into his hand. Chun-Lan and Uncle Yen stared at the ball of light with reluctance. They really wanted to snatch it back. Ji Tianqing kept the golden ball of light and asked, "You've seen the blueprint. Chun-Lan, do you want to bet or not?" This time, Uncle Yen didn't have to say anything. Chun-Lan nodded without hesitation. "Yes. Only a fool wouldn't bet." Although the primordial jade marrow was precious, it wasn't as important as the blueprint of the 100 smelting divine hammer. Chun-Lan was already fantasizing that if he won the blueprint, he would become a hero of the 100 smelting ancient sect. At that time, he would definitely become the chief disciple. It was even possible that he would inherit the position of the sect leader in the future. The more he thought about it, the more excited he became. His face turned red. Uncle Yen didn't forget to remind him, "Young Master Lan, don't forget the time." Chun Lan immediately sobered up. He regained his composure and said to Ji Tianxing, "Young Master Tianxing, I agree to bet with you. However, to be fair, I have a request. Your divine armor already has 130 laws. My divine sword only has 100. Therefore, I want to start the refinement. You have to wait a day before you can continue. If you agree, we can start now." Jiang Tianxing and Jiang Tianyi were filled with indignation. They immediately retorted, "Chun Lan, can you be any more shameless? Young Master Tianxing can inscribe 130 laws. That's his ability. Young Master Tianxing has already competed once. Now you want to continue the competition. You want to lead by a day? How dare you say that?" Chun Lan also felt that he was going overboard. He wanted to change the time to 20 hours. However, before he could say anything, Ji Tianxing nodded in agreement. "All right, the rules are set then." "Good." Chun Lan was overjoyed. He quickly flattered, "Young Master Tianxing is indeed straightforward. You have the demeanor of a master." Since Ji Tianxing had agreed, Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianyi had nothing to say. They could only shut their mouth. The two of them were filled with worry. They could only pray silently, hoping that Ji Tianxing would win. Soon, the competition began. Chun Lan was the first to open the divine cauldron. He placed the golden divine sword that he had previously refined into the cauldron and prepared to inscribe laws and restrictions. Ji Tianxing sat in the main hall with his eyes closed. He waited patiently. An hour later, Chun Lan's divine sword had melted into a sword embryo. It was in a moldable state. He began to inscribe laws and restrictions. 2 hours later, he had inscribed a law and stacked over 100 divine arrays and restrictions. As time passed, he focused on casting the arts. He kept inscribing law and restriction after law. Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianxing became even more anxious when they saw that he was progressing rapidly. However, Ji Tianxing kept his eyes closed. He did not look at Chun Lan at all. He seemed especially calm. Chapter 3479. Unknowingly, a day passed. Ji Tianxing followed the agreement and opened his eyes. He took out the 9 heavens divine cauldron and started refining. At this time, Chun Lan had already engraved 27 laws and 270 array formations on his divine sword. Although compared to Ji Tianxing's divine armor, he was still short of 3 laws and 30 array formations. But he was filled with confidence and anticipation and did not feel worried at all. When Ji Tianxing started refining, he delayed for a breath of time and secretly took a look at Ji Tianxing. Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing was as calm and indifferent as ever. He could not see through him at all. Chun Lan thought to himself, "This guy is still pretending to be deep. I still can't see through him. Ha ha ha, but no matter how well you pretend, it's useless. You'll be exposed very soon. Previously, you refined continuously for 7 days and only rested for a day in between. There's no way you can maintain your peak state. Next, we still have to engrave more than 170 laws. It'll take at least half a month's time. Let's see how you can persevere." These thoughts flashed through his mind. Chun Lan was no longer distracted and continued to focus on refining. The hall fell into silence. Ji Tianxing and Chun Lan were both immersed in refining without any distractions. Uncle Yen, Jiang Tianyi, Jiang Tianxing, Lin Zhen, and Zhan Longxiang were all watching intently. No one made a sound, afraid that they would disturb Ji Tianxing and Chun Lan. Without a doubt, Ji Tianxing and Chun Lan were the 2 divine blacksmiths with the highest attainments in refining among them. In this competition, the 2 of them also gave it their all and brought out their trump cards. Everyone watched intently. While they were filled with amazement and admiration, they also broadened their horizons and learned a lot of experience in refining. Especially Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang, their hearts were filled with agitation and excitement. To be able to watch two divine blacksmiths compete at close range was something that the two of them yearned for even in their dreams. Unknowingly, 3 days passed. Ji Tianqing and Chen Lan were still focused on refining and did not slack off at all. But the further they went, the harder it was to refine. The speed also became slower. Chen Lan had engraved 184 laws and over 1,800 formation restrictions on the divine sword. This speed was already his limit, surpassing all his previous refinements. He was confident and proud. He couldn't help but glance at Ji Tianqing. He had thought that Ji Tianqing would definitely look tired and slow down his speed. But he was disappointed. Ji Tianqing was as calm as ever, without the slightest tiredness or sleepiness. His refining speed was as fast as ever. Of course, only Ji Tianqing himself knew that the Frost Moon Divine Armor he was refining already had 196 nomological laws. That's right, this godly armor was called Frozen Moon. A long time ago, he had planned to forge 2 divine swords and a set of divine armor for Yun Yao. The dual swords of Sun and Moon had been completed a long time ago. He was going to take this opportunity to refine the Ice Moon divine armor. Unknowingly, 12 days had passed. Chen Lan's refining work was finally coming to an end. He had already engraved 290 nomological laws and 2,900 formation restrictions on the divine sword. In at most another 20 hours, the divine sword would become a mid-grade king-grade divine artifact. Such a fast speed was something Chen Lan had never thought of in the past. Unknowingly, he had already surpassed him. His refining attainments had improved again. He was proud and self-satisfied. He couldn't help but look at Ji Tianqing opposite him. However, when he saw Ji Tianqing across from him, he was dumbfounded on the spot and was stunned. Because Ji Tianqing had just stopped and was casting spells. He raised his head and looked at him. Their eyes met. Ji Tianqing's expression was calm and indifferent. There was a hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. But Chen Lan seemed to have been struck by lightning. His body stiffened and his mind went blank. He actually already completed it? At this moment, Chen Lan's heart was in a mess. He felt that everything was unreal. He couldn't believe it, much less accept it. Ji Tianqing had actually completed refining a mid-grade king-grade divine artifact. This couldn't be real. A deep sense of defeat filled Chen Lan's mind, causing his face to turn ashen. The confidence and pride that he was brimming with earlier vanished instantly, turning into disappointment and dejection. Right then, Uncle Yen reminded him with a voice transmission, "Young Master Lan, don't be in a daze. Continue casting your spells. Otherwise, the array formation will be messed up and the divine sword will collapse." Only then did Chen Lan snap out of his daze. He hurriedly suppressed his distracting thoughts and calmed himself down before continuing to refine his weapon. He muttered internally, "I haven't lost yet. I can't be distracted. No matter what, I have to refine this divine sword. Even if I lose to him, I can't embarrass myself, and I can't embarrass the sect." With that belief, Chen Lan entered a focused state and continued to refine his weapon without any distractions. Everyone in the hall had already seen the outcome and knew the answer. However, no one disturbed Chen Lan. They waited patiently for him to finish refining his weapon. Time seemed to have slowed down. After another 24 hours, Chen Lan was finally done with her artifact forging. His divine sword was successfully engraved with 300 nomological runes and 3,000 array formations. However, when he finished refining his weapon and stopped, there was only a sigh of relief. There was no joy at all. "It's over," he muttered to himself and raised his head to look at Ji Tianqing, who was in front of him. Ji Tianqing, who had been resting with his eyes closed, finally opened his eyes and said calmly, "Although the outcome is already decided, we still have to show off our results, right?" Chen Lan was depressed. He nodded stiffly and waved his hand to open the cauldron lid. Swoosh! Golden light flashed. The golden divine sword flew into the air and floated quietly, shining with dazzling divine light. The appearance of the divine sword did not change much. It was just that its divine power aura was sharper and more sacred. The number of nomological runes and restrictions within it had also tripled. It had successfully become a medium-grade king-level divine weapon. At that moment, Ji Tianqing also opened the cauldron lid. Swoosh! Ice-blue divine light flashed and a bone-chilling cold spread, freezing the entire hall once again. The ice-moon divine armor flew into the air and floated quietly, shining with dazzling light. Compared to Chun Lan's divine sword, this divine armor was more beautiful, exquisite, and dazzling. Moreover, the divine armor's structure was more complicated. Its defense was stronger and it had all sorts of functions. Most importantly, the number of nomological laws contained within the armor was as many as 303. Without a doubt, Ji Tianqing had held back again. Not only did he spend 1 day less than Chun Lan, but he also engraved 3 more nomological runes. A complete victory. A complete victory without any suspense. At that moment, Jiang Tianxing and Jiang Tianyi were cheering excitedly and clapping excitedly. Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang were also impressed. They clapped and cheered as they looked at Ji Tianxing with eyes full of respect and admiration. As for Chun Lan and Uncle Yen, their expressions were ugly and gloomy. They had lost the competition. Not only did they have to withdraw from the competition, but they also had to give up on the 2 blacksmithing geniuses. What made Chun Lan feel even more pained was that the primordial jade marrow that he had been saving to break through to an upper-level god king was about to change owners. Chapter 3480. Chun Lan had nothing to say about the results of the competition, even though he had defeated Jiang Tianyi in the first round. However, after Ji Tianxing joined the battle, he won both battles. Everyone had seen the competition with their own eyes, and they were full of admiration for Ji Tianxing's skills. Chun Lan had lost to Ji Tianxing, but he accepted it wholeheartedly and did not feel embarrassed. He could feel that the gap between him and Ji Tianxing was huge. However, this did not mean that he could accept the result. The blueprint of the 100 smelting divine hammer was extremely precious, and he and Uncle Yen had seen it with their own eyes. However, he regretted it now and hated that he had been blinded by the temptation. Only now did he understand why Ji Tianxing had used the blueprint, which was 10 times more precious than the primordial jade essence, as a bet. He was confident that he would win. From the start, he had fallen into Ji Tianxing's trap. However, the bait was too tempting, and he and Uncle Yen had no choice but to take the bait. When he thought about how the primordial jade essence, which was like his second life, was going to be given to Ji Tianxing, his heart ached and his breathing became hot. Soon, the hall regained its silence. Ji Tianxing also kept the 9 heavens cauldron and ice moon divine armor, and looked at Chun Lan calmly. Without waiting for Ji Tianxing to speak, Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianxing said impatiently, "Chun Lan, our Jiang clan has won this competition. You have to withdraw from the competition between the 2 blacksmithing geniuses. Also, you have to accept your loss. Chun Lan, it's time for you to honor your bet." Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianxing's voices were filled with excitement and pride, and they looked at Chun Lan with sympathy. Chun Lan was ashamed and angry, but he could only endure it. With so many people watching, he could not go back on his word. After taking a deep breath and calming himself down, Chun Lan said expressionlessly, "I have lost. According to the agreement, I will leave Perpetual Joy City today. Furthermore, I will not take the initiative to invite the 2 blacksmithing geniuses to join the 100 smelting ancient sect. However, those 2 geniuses are not willing to join the same sect, so you can only accept one at most. Do you think you have one?" Ha ha. Naive. Hearing Chun Lan's words, the smiles on Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianxing's faces froze. That's right. Although Chun Lan wanted to withdraw from the competition, the Jiang clan could only recruit one artificer. It was very likely that the other genius would take the initiative to join the 100 Refinement Ancient sect. Chun Lan had only promised that she would not take the initiative to recruit any of them, but she had not promised to reject any of them. In the end, the 100 Refinements Ancient sect still got the upper hand. Thinking of this, Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianxing's excitement instantly vanished. Seeing the two of them deflated and depressed, Chun Lan revealed a smug sneer. He then turned to Ji Tianxing, cupped his fists and saluted. "Young Master Tianxing, this king admires your attainments and skills in refining artifacts, and I accept my defeat wholeheartedly. However, the primordial chalcedony was too precious, so I didn't carry it with me. I've always left it in the sect. How about this? I'll go back to the sect and get it for you now." Chun Lan lowered her head slightly, observing Ji Tianxing's reaction as she spoke. Ji Tianxing immediately frowned, and a cold smile appeared on his face. Jiang Tianxing's face was filled with anger as he shouted, "Chun Lan, are you trying to renege on your debt? This place is so far away from the 100 Refinements Ancient sect, are you trying to buy time?" Chun Lan quickly waved his hands and smiled. "You misunderstood. This king is upright, so how can I renege on my debt? If young Master Tianxing doesn't believe me, then follow me back to the sect to get it." Jiang Tianyi was also very dissatisfied, and he said coldly, "Chun Lan, don't play these tricks. Do you think we can't see through your thoughts?" "Ha ha ha!" Chun Lan sneered with disdain and shrugged helplessly. "You're measuring the heart of a gentleman with your own mean measure. If you don't believe me, then there's nothing I can do." Uncle Yen also quickly chimed in and said righteously, "Young Master Lan has already said that we won't renege on our debt. The primordial chalcedony will definitely be given to young Master Tianxing. However, young Master Lan didn't bring it with him, so he needs to go back to the sect to get it. How can you be so aggressive? You're shameless." Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianxing were speechless, and they could only suppress the anger in their hearts. They both suspected that the primordial chalcedony was on Chun Lan, and that Chun Lan was just trying to find an excuse to escape. However, without any evidence, they couldn't do anything to Chun Lan. At this time, Ji Tianxing, who had been silent all this while, finally spoke. He looked at Chun Lan calmly and said, "How precious is the primordial chalcedony? You must treat it like your life, so how can you not bring it with you? You probably think that this king won't fall out with you, and won't search or rob you. That's why you lied so brazenly, right?" Having her thoughts exposed, Chun Lan's body stiffened and her expression turned ugly. However, he immediately pretended to be angry and shouted righteously, "Young Master Tianxing, even if this king respects you as a senior, you can't slander me and frame me for no reason. Everything I said is true. If you don't believe me, you can follow me back to the 100 Refinements Ancient sect." Before he could finish, Ji Tianxing raised his hand and interrupted him. He said calmly, "There's no need to go through so much trouble. As long as you set up an altar and swear to the heavens that you don't have the primordial chalcedony, if you go against your oath, you're willing to be struck by lightning until you're reduced to ashes. Your divine Tao will be destroyed, and you'll never be reincarnated. As long as you do that, this king will believe you. How about that?" Chun Lan's face turned green, and he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He would never dare to swear to the heavens in such a solemn manner. After all, one couldn't simply swear an oath. The heavens would fulfill it. Seeing that Chun Lan was speechless, Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianxing laughed mockingly and scolded him. "Ha ha ha ha! Chun Lan, are you feeling guilty? You don't dare to swear to the heavens, do you? You're still saying that you're not going to go back on your word? To think that you were acting so well just now. I didn't expect you to be exposed so quickly." Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang watched from the side. They didn't have the right to interrupt. However, there was a subtle change in their expressions. Their impression of Chen Lan dropped even further. Actually, everyone already knew the answer in their hearts. Chen Lan was so embarrassed that he wanted to make an oath on the altar. However, Uncle Yen pulled him back and advised him, "Young Master Lan, don't be rash. You can't simply swear such an oath. It's very easy for it to come true. The price is too high." After saying that, he glared at Ji Tianqing and said coldly, "Young Master Tianqing, you're being so overbearing. Don't you think you're looking down on the 100 Refinements ancient sect? Furthermore, you're a senior expert. How can you make things difficult for a junior? You even forced young Master Lan to swear such a vicious oath?" Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "You're right. This king really doesn't care about the 100 Refinements ancient sect. Cut the crap. If you don't hand over the primordial jade essence today, don't even think about leaving the Gold Laurel Palace." Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3481. It seems like you're determined to offend the 100 Refinements ancient sect and not let us go? Chen Lan also flew into a rage out of humiliation. He glared fiercely at Ji Tianqing and asked in a deep voice. Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianqing sneered. Chen Lan, you're really good at twisting the truth. You're the one who refused to honor your bet and yet you're still trying to twist the truth? Chen Lan, I didn't expect you to be so shameless. Luckily, there are so many of us here. If you're determined to go back on your word, we'll let the other clans see how despicable you are. Although Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang did not speak, they knew that things were serious. Both of them retreated to the edge of the hall to avoid being implicated. Ji Tianqing glared at Chen Lan and said sternly, "I'll say it one last time. Hand over the primordial jade essence, or you'll have to bear the consequences." Bear the consequences. Uncle Yen was completely enraged. His body shone with a dazzling divine light as his divine energy surged. "You've gone too far. I won't give in. If you want to bully young Master Lan, you'll have to go through me first." As he spoke, Uncle Yen stepped in front of Chen Lan and spoke in a dignified manner. "Young Master Lan, I'll cover your escape." Chen Lan had the same idea. However, how could he act so cowardly in front of so many people? His body shone with divine light as his divine energy surged. He said confidently, "Uncle Yen, we're disciples of the 100 Refinements ancient sect. Of course, we'll leave with our heads held high. I'd like to see what kind of ability this guy has to be so arrogant." Seeing Chen Lan and Uncle Yan's boiling fighting spirit, Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianqing also laughed out of anger, their bodies bursting with fighting spirit. "What? Not only do you want to go back on your word, you want to fight? You want to fight now that you can't go back on your word? Who's afraid of who? Come on." The two brothers stepped forward and stood on Ji Tianqing's left and right. The atmosphere in the hall instantly became hostile. On the surface, Chen Lan and Uncle Yen only had 2 people, while Ji Tianqing had 3 people. Moreover, Ji Tianqing was a senior expert with a mysterious background. Chen Lan and Uncle Yan's aura was immediately suppressed. Their eyes were filled with fear. Uncle Yen frowned and instructed Chen Lan via voice transmission, "Young Master Lan, I'll hold the 3 of them back. You take the opportunity to escape from the back. As long as you shake them off, they will be wary of the 100 Refinement ancient sect and won't do anything to me." This time, their conversation would not be heard by anyone else. Without waiting for Uncle Yen to finish, Chen Lan replied without hesitation, "All right, then be careful." Uncle Yan's expression was a little strange, and he quickly swallowed the rest of his words back into his stomach. In the next moment, he shouted in a tragic tone and waved his fists to attack Ji Tianqing. "This old man will not tolerate your bullying." Uncle Yen used all of his power and instantly sent out 49 flaming fists towards Ji Tianqing, Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianqing. Each of the flaming fists was as big as a water tank, and their divine power was violent. They also contained dozens of divine Tao laws, and their power was terrifying. Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianqing's expressions were solemn. They used all of their divine power to block and neutralize Uncle Yan's attack. However, before they could do anything, they saw a blur in front of their eyes, and a sky full of sword light bloomed. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Ji Tianqing had made his move. Unknowingly, he held the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand and instantly sent out 49 flaming white sword lights to meet Uncle Yan's attack. Bang! 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 Muffled sounds erupted as the 49 flaming fist lights were shattered by the sword light, and divine flames that covered the heavens and the earth burst forth. However, the white sword lights tore through space and caused a few pitch-black voids to appear in the hall. The divine flames that covered the sky and earth were all swallowed by the dark voids, and no one was harmed. Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianqing were shocked. Lin Zhen and Zhan Longxiang were secretly relieved, and their respect for Ji Tianqing grew. Uncle Yan was also stunned. He had expected Ji Tianqing to be more powerful than him, most likely a high-level divine lord. However, he had never thought that Ji Tianqing would use such a simple and violent method to neutralize his attack. The hall was still intact, and his plan to create chaos and give Qin Lan a chance to escape had failed. However, he didn't want to give up. He shouted again and used a divine power. This time, he had learned his lesson. Attacking Ji Tianqing was secondary. His main goal was to disperse his attacks and destroy the entire hall to create chaos. However, Uncle Yan was about to use his divine power when he saw a blur in front of his eyes and a figure appeared out of nowhere. In his eyes, there was a fist that was rapidly enlarging. Uncle Yan realized that something was wrong and instinctively wanted to retreat. However, it was too late. Boom! With a loud bang, Ji Tianqing's golden left fist hit Uncle Yan's forehead. Uncle Yan was immediately sent flying and smashed into the wall 100 feet away. More than half of the wall collapsed, and countless pieces of rock were sent flying. Uncle Yan, on the other hand, fell to the ground. His consciousness was blurry and he was unconscious. It was obvious that Ji Tianqing's punch had passed through his forehead and hit his mind, knocking him out. Swish! While the divine light flashed and the pieces of rock were sent flying, Qin Lan decisively retreated and passed through the collapsed wall, trying to escape the gold osmanthus palace. However, he had just flown out of the hall and appeared in the sky above the manor when a white figure flashed in front of him. Ji Tianqing had blocked his way. Swish! Qin Lan didn't hesitate and used his teleportation technique to move a few thousand miles away from Changle City. Unfortunately, the moment he used his teleportation ability, Ji Tianqing slashed out a blazing white sword light and sealed off the entire space of the Gold Laurel Palace. The space around Qin Lan froze. He was like a mosquito in ice, unable to move at all. Swish! A cold light flashed, and the pitch-black and cold sword of burial of heaven was placed against his neck. Qin Lan's body stiffened and his expression turned ugly. He didn't dare to act rashly. The battle had just begun, but it ended abruptly just like that. Jiang Tianyi and Jiang Tianqing, who had followed closely behind, held their divine weapons and looked murderous. However, when they saw that Uncle Yan had been knocked unconscious and Qin Lan had surrendered, they were stunned and quickly put away their weapons. Soon, Lin Zhen and the battle dragon elephant appeared in the courtyard. Qin Lan was utterly humiliated in front of everyone. He was furious and humiliated to the extreme. He made up his mind and roared at Ji Tianqing, "I don't have the jade essence, but I do have a life." Ji Tianqing narrowed his eyes and exuded a bone-chilling aura. He asked in a low voice, "Are you sure?" Seeing that he was really angry and filled with murderous intent, Qin Lan didn't doubt that he would really kill him. Thus, Qin Lan quickly corrected himself. I'm not sure. Senior, I was just joking."